Chapter 983. Belegaju's words were undoubtedly explosive news. Whether it was to the media reporters or manager Lee, it was too shocking. A few of the company's female employees looked at each other. Their first reaction was that their CEO was really married and was not using this as a publicity stunt for the company. However, everyone's inner feelings were different. Some were envious, while others were jealous. After all, they were all at the front desk, watching everyone entering and leaving the company. The CEO had never had intimate contact with anyone. In their eyes, Belegaju had always been single. As long as he was single, any one of them could become Cinderella. Generally, girls of this age were still inexperienced and were still dreaming. They did not know that Cinderella was as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns in the world. Everyone was wondering what kind of woman could actually capture the heart of a man like Belegaju. The media wanted to ask more questions, such as who the other party was, the other party's family background, and how the other party knew Bailey Georgiou. However, after Belegaju announced his sovereignty, he was not in the mood to answer the questions. He glanced indifferently at the reporters who were asking these questions. His gaze was extremely cold. The reporters were about to break out in cold sweat when they saw his stare. They did not dare to ask more questions. They moved their throats with difficulty and swallowed their words. The media immediately understood Belegaju's taboo and did not dare to ask more about Helene Vivian. Everyone present was smart, and manager Lee was even more so. After a few words, he already understood the main purpose of their cold and honorable CEO accepting the media's interview this time. It was obvious that the CEO was waiting for the media to arrive so that he could let the whole world know that he was married and that his wife loved him very much. Manager Lee was speechless. This press conference was completely used by the CEO as a means to announce his sovereignty. Where was the promised publicity for the company? Manager Lee was on the verge of tears. However, while he was being pulled away, he was distracted to look at the announcements released by the media. There were only a few pieces of news, but the headlines of all the major websites had the words Ju Wei Group floating above them. As a marketing manager, there was only one word left in his heart: beautiful. Under normal circumstances, the press conference would have ended at this point. However, since manager Lee knew what the CEO was thinking, of course, he would not relax. He enthusiastically began to answer some unimportant questions. Anyway, as long as the big boss and the little boss were sitting on the stage, these people would not leave. This was the scene that Helene Vivian saw when she came in. She could see no less than dozens of cameras being carried by people. The huge reception hall on the first floor was packed with people. Belegaju also saw Helene Vivian. He curled his lips into a smile, and there was a kind of handsomeness that was like the melting of winter snow. He strode toward Helene Wei with his long legs. The media automatically made way for him. When they turned around, they realized that there was a woman standing not far behind them. The woman was holding a little boy's hand. Her lips were half-curled, and she didn't show the slightest sign of stage fright in front of so many people. Instead, she looked handsome and free. The media had never seen a woman wearing a racing suit so beautifully. Half of her trousers were rolled up, revealing her slender ankles. The woman looked very fair, and there was a kind of beauty in full bloom. She had a head of waist-length chestnut curly hair. Her face was mostly covered by sunglasses, but it still couldn't hide the warmth that radiated from this person. She saw the media pointing their cameras at her, but she didn't panic. Instead, she took off her sunglasses and gave the reporters a faint smile. She was so beautiful. And this woman was very smart. Not only was she smart, but how many women could talk and laugh in front of so many cameras? Other than people in the entertainment industry, there were also those who were born into famous families. They were radiant from the moment they were born. However, it was obvious that this woman in front of them was not familiar to them, and they had never seen her on any occasion. "You're so late." Belegaju reached out and pulled her over. He put his hand on Helene Vivian's waist as if there was no one else around, causing an uproar. The reporters began to frantically press the shutter button, wanting to capture this scene. Bailey Shangxie, who was originally very cool, was still tormenting his new manager. When he looked up and saw Qing Chen, He walked over and took his younger brother from his mother. Then, he rolled up Ching-Chen's drooping sleeves and reached out to hug her. Hellion Vivian didn't forget to look at the two little ones while talking to Beligaju. Seeing that Beligaju insisted on hugging Xiao Bao, she smiled at Beligaju and said, "He misses Ching-Chen." Yes, he even said today that he wants the advertisers to give him a raise so that he can earn tuition fees for Ching-Chen. As Beligaju spoke, he tilted his head and kissed Hellion Vivian's hair. His voice was very sexy as he said, "Shangxie and I have been waiting for you guys for 2 hours." Knowing His Highness's temper, Hellion Vivian soothed him and said, "I'll compensate you later." Beligaju didn't say anything else, but the surrounding subordinates could see that he was very satisfied with the situation. Manager Li and the other senior executives of Ju Wei Group couldn't help but look at each other. The surprise in their hearts was written all over their faces. After all, in their hearts, the CEO Ju, who killed people without spilling blood in the business field, was really cold. They didn't expect that he would actually act coquettishly toward a woman. That's right, he was acting coquettishly. Although the man's tone and expression were particularly cold, that was the truth. Many senior media personnel heard this conversation and couldn't help but look at Hellion Vivian again. At first, they thought that Beligaju's relationship with Beligaju wouldn't be very good even if he announced his marriage. Otherwise, how could Beligaju not have a female companion by his side? Now, they had to re-evaluate this relationship. This was because Beligaju's every move was a declaration that the woman in his arms was very important to him and was unique. Someone couldn't help but sigh. "CEO Ju, we finally believe that you're really married." However, there were still people who were curious about the child Hellion Vivian brought over. The camera immediately turned to Ching-Chen. Because they were too complacent, they forgot to be careful. Bailey Shangxie stood in front of her younger brother. At such a young age, she was very oppressive. "Point your cameras at my father. My younger brother doesn't like to be photographed. Also, you can put my father's and my photos in any magazine today. But if anyone dares to publish my mother's and my younger brother's faces, I promise you that you won't be able to bear the consequences." Chapter 984. When Bailey Shangxie said this, the coldness in his eyes made many reporters shudder. They had only treated him as a child just now. Now, they realized that the heir of Ju Wei Group was not an ordinary child. As if he was threatening them, he looked at their work cards and smiled. "Xinyu Media, Guangying Media, I'll remember your companies." Hearing this, the two reporters who had just taken a photo turned pale and looked at Manager Li. Manager Li still had a smile on his face, but his aura did not diminish at all. "Since young Master Shangxie said so, please abide by the rules of Ju Wei Group and delete the photos of Madam and young Master. Otherwise, we will use commercial means." Hellion Vivian did not think it was a big deal to show her face. However, it was obvious that Beligaju acquiesced to Bailey Shangxie's actions. He even added with a smile, "They should know what should be released and what should not. If they don't, there is no need for them to be in this industry." It was very contradictory, wasn't it? Since they did not want the photos to be released, why did they have to hold a press conference? Soon, the industry veterans came to a conclusion and asked Beligaju tentatively, "CEO Ju, do you want to release the photos of you and Madam?" Madam's face is not in the photos, only her back. Hearing this, Beligaju smiled. "Which company are you from?" "Tang Enterprise Media." The media man adjusted his glasses. He was an elite, handsome, and very smart man. Beligaju's thin lips were still curled. He looked at the media man and instructed Manager Li, "Give him all the exclusive photos of Ju Wei Group in the future." "Yes." Manager Li was stunned. The other reporters were even more surprised. They wondered what the other party had done to get all the exclusive photos of Ju Wei Group. Of course, there were also those who hated themselves for not making a move earlier. When those who were often in the industry heard the result, they completely understood what Bailey Jiaju wanted. He wanted to announce to the whole world that this woman was his, but he did not want others to see the treasure in his arms. They did not expect it to be like this. It had been a long time since such a man had appeared in the business circle. Any successful man would more or less be a womanizer. This was because they would always prefer those who were younger than them. The more money and power they had, the more they would do so. It was too easy to obtain them. No one could guarantee that they would be loyal for a lifetime. In this land, there were too many men who didn't really take true love seriously. He loved you this year, but he would fall in love with someone else next year. For someone like Bailey Georgiou, who was rich and powerful, and whose handsome side profile alone could make countless women submit to him, it was really rare to see a business emperor who cherished a person to such an extent. There was also another group of female reporters who focused their attention on Bailey Shangxie. If it was said that they had taken a liking to young master's face in the beginning, they were now extremely attracted to young master's brother complex. Especially when he heard Qing Chen say from behind Bailey Shangxie, "Brother, I brought you chocolate." Bailey Shangxie lowered his head and took it to eat. He did not forget to feed his brother a mouthful. When he wiped his brother's mouth, it made people want to open their WeChat moments and start scrolling. Unexpectedly, Bailey Shangxie won a group of auntie fans. In addition, these auntie fans were all in the media industry. It was destined that Bailey Shangxie would be very popular in this circle in the future. Hence, on the day the press conference ended, someone set up a brother complex team on Weibo. They wrote all the words that the demonic young master said to his brother into a short story. Coupled with Bailey Shangxie's extremely cool little face, it was simply piercing through people's hearts. No one posted a picture of Qingchen's face online. In fact, there was only one picture of her back. It was just that she was being carried by Bailey Shangxie, who was a head taller than her, and she was staggering forward. The focus was still on Bailey Shangxie. That little face of hers was extremely serious. Seeing such a picture, the netizens exclaimed, "How can there be such a sensible brother? A brother complex for 100 years. It's said that young master entered this circle to earn money for his brother's school fees. So cute. No, I want to take her home and raise her. Let's not talk about anything else. Let's wait for young master's debut." For the entire day, the popularity of the words Ju Wei group did not decrease from the internet. Beligaju was very satisfied with the commotion this time. In this way, some people should know who Weiwei belonged to. Hellion Vivian turned the steering wheel in her hand. After parking the car, she smiled and poked a certain highness's side face. "You seem very happy." Beligaju did not deny it. He opened the door and got out of the car. Hellion Vivian liked a certain highness like this. When he was happy, he was really very handsome. Hence, she would not let him become a killing machine. Even if such a day really came, she would protect him. This man fell from heaven and became a demon for her. He tore apart time and space and lost his divinity. What reason did she have not to protect him? Even if she had to betray the whole world, she would stand by his side. Moreover, the worst-case scenario was that he would help her fulfill her wish and then devour her. As a person of Buddhism, Hellion Vivian could clearly see the demons behind him that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. They were beginning to move. She sensed the subtlety of this because this time, a certain highness did not hold her hand. Instead, he stood there and looked at her with a faint smile. Hellion Vivian knew very well that that was the smile of a demon. But so what? Hellion Vivian tilted her head and took a step forward. Then, she held Beligaju's hand and said, "We bought a lot of groceries this time. Let's push the cart in." To be honest, Beligaju and Bailey Shangxie had never shopped in a supermarket. Therefore, when they walked in, the father and son frowned at the same time. It was rare that they did not dislike each other. Little Qing Chen was already sitting in the trolley consciously. Usually, when he walked, he would sit in the trolley when he went to the supermarket so that it would be more convenient for Hellion Wei to buy things. Bailey Shangxie saw his younger brother sitting in the cart. Without waiting for Hellion Vivian to say anything, he automatically took the cart. Bailey Shangxie's way of treating his younger brother was to throw whatever Qing Chen wanted to eat into the cart in a row. Hellion Vivian held her forehead and said helplessly, "You bought too much." "It's okay." Beligaju was very calm. "We'll pay our own way. It's time for him to take some practical actions to support the family. How can he just talk about it?" Hellion Vivian. Chapter 985. Bailey Shangxie wasn't afraid that his sinister father would make him pay the bill himself. After all, he had just signed the contract and received a gold card from his manager. He could do whatever he wanted in the future. Hellion Vivian also pushed a cart. The two of them only liked to shop in the snack section. She brought His Highness to the place where she usually bought vegetables and meat. "What do you want to eat tonight?" Hellion Vivian asked the man beside her with a chuckle. Beligaju obviously had no experience in this place. He didn't understand why he had to do such an inefficient thing himself. However, when Hellion Vivian turned to ask him, it seemed that all his impatience had turned into something else. He looked at her hand and pursed his thin lips. "Whatever." Hellion Vivian smiled. "How about steak? You've always liked to eat beef. Shall I make it rare for you?" "Medium rare." Beligaju nodded. There was a gentleness in his eyes that even he didn't know. He reached out and separated Hellion Vivian from the others who were shopping in the supermarket. At this time of the day, the people who came to the supermarket to buy groceries were basically aunties. Beligaju attracted a lot of attention the moment he appeared. After all, it wasn't suitable for him to appear here. Even though he was standing there to protect Hellion Vivian, he was still a shining figure that was difficult to ignore. "Did you see that? The person picking the steak in front is dressed in Armani. Aren't his legs too long? What a good figure. Do you want to hit on him?" "Hit on him? Don't you see that he already has a girlfriend? What a pity. But handsome men and beautiful women are so pleasing to the eye." Hellion Wei listened to the discussion of the girls beside her, tilted her head and smiled at them. The girl's heart softened. So beautiful and has a good personality. No wonder her man is so handsome. He was indeed handsome. Moreover, he was excessively young. He looked a little like a vampire aristocrat in the movies. There was a cold look in the corner of his eyes. Just looking at him made one's heart beat faster. Hellion Vivian knew how influential His Highness's face was, so she didn't let him stay here for long. After picking the steak, she took him to another place. "After making the steak, I'll make you a chocolate cake. You and your son love it. Just one piece is enough." Beligaju's voice was very indifferent. "Let them do the rest." Hellion Vivian. "Beauty Wei, Big Brother bought me yogurt, do you want to drink it?" Hellion Vivian didn't look at the two little ones for a while and found that the cart was already full. Qing Chen sat on the pile of snacks, her eyes very beautiful. Bailey Shangxie said seriously to his younger brother, "The car is too small, it can't hold much. I'll buy it for you next time." Millimeter. Little Qing Chen nodded as he struggled to stretch out his short legs. Hellion Vivian facepalmed. A cart full of snacks. Wasn't that too much of a wastrel? Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian glanced at Beligaju, indicating for him to do something about it. After receiving Hellion Vivian's gaze, Beligaju lowered his eyes and started to educate his son. His voice was very low and had his usual indifference. "Don't buy so many things in the future." Hellion Vivian was touched. After all, from the moment they entered the supermarket until now, His Highness had finally used the right way to educate his son. But it turned out that Hellion Vivian was moved too early. Because His Highness' next sentence was his true purpose. "It's troublesome to buy so many things. If you really like them, buy this supermarket and take your time to choose." Bailey Shangxie's little face was very cool. Obviously, he didn't think that there was such a way. Now that he was reminded by his father, he immediately took out his small phone and called his agent. "Help me buy a supermarket." The agent glared at him. "What do you want me to buy?" "A supermarket." Bailey Shangxie's voice was indifferent. "The bigger, the better." The agent gasped. Just as he was about to shout out a stomach full of words, the other party had already hung up. The agent was unwilling to give up. He called back, but the other party didn't pick up. Instead, he received a short message, "I'm with my younger brother, don't be noisy." The agent. Who's the one being noisy? Also, don't make buying a supermarket sound like it's as easy as buying ice cream, okay? Also, why did he have to look for him to buy things? Hellion Wei could imagine how pitiful her son's manager must be. But Beligaju gave Da Bao a look that said, You finally have the ability to analyze things on your own. This, Helene Vivian massaged her temples. She still had to educate her son. She pulled Bailey Shangxie over. It's too wasteful to buy a supermarket. Qing Chen only likes a few things. He doesn't like most of the things here. Bailey Shangxie thought about it and felt that his mother made sense. Then I won't buy it. Helene Vivian was finally relieved. My younger brother likes to eat chocolate and potato chips. I'll ask the two manufacturers to buy it. Bailey Shangxie held his small phone coolly and was about to make a call. Helene Vivian. You'd better buy a supermarket. Beligaju seemed to like seeing Helene Vivian's helpless look. He pulled her over and laughed softly. The vibration from his chest made her feel close and safe. Helene Vivian laughed as well. She helped the man tidy up his hair. Her thin lips curved as she walked forward and picked some fruits for the cake. Bailey Shangxie pushed Qing Chen behind Helene Vivian and Beligaju. His small figure was very tall and straight, and the scene was very cute. It was almost 5 o'clock when the family of 4 finished shopping in the supermarket. There were indeed too many things. Fortunately, Helene Vivian drove a Wrangler, which was very spacious. Because she had to bring the 2 little ones, Helene Vivian gave His Highness the car keys and asked him to drive the car directly to the entrance of the large shopping mall. This way, they could directly get in the car and didn't need to carry things for a long time. Because the underground parking lot didn't allow the supermarket's trolley, there was an elevator at the entrance of the shopping mall, which could be directly pushed up. His Highness had always been patient with Helene Vivian. He took the car keys and walked to the underground parking lot with one hand in the pocket of his suit pants. His deep facial features looked even more handsome in the dark. There were 2 girls in the elevator with him, and they were dressed very fashionably. When one of the girls saw him, her eyes lit up. After getting off the elevator, she saw Beligaju walking towards the Wrangler. She thought of a plan and turned to the side to block in front of Beligaju's car. "Sir, our car has been driven away. Can you send us to the exit? Can we take a taxi?" Chapter 986. Choo-choo, what are you doing? The other girl pulled her arm, but she also agreed with her approach. After all, it would save a lot of effort to get someone to carry them up. Of course, the premise was that this gentleman was willing. The girl called Choo-choo was obviously not as simple as the other girl thought. She was pretty, with big eyes and good skin. She was a young girl. She saw this man when she was shopping in the supermarket. At first, she felt that it was a pity, but now that they met, it was fate. As for whether he had a girlfriend, she didn't care at all. What's more, such a handsome and rich man, anyone had the right to pursue him. He would only be hers if she really got him. Thinking of this, Choo-choo bit her lower lip and said to Beligaju, "Sir, we don't want to trouble you. It's just that we bought too many things this time. It's very inconvenient for 2 girls to carry them out." Beligaju didn't say anything. He just sat in the car and looked at her. Choo-choo felt that such a man had to rely on himself to take the initiative. She opened the back door and put her hands together. She was very cute. Please, sir, you just need to send us to the door." After saying that, she put the snacks in her hand on the back seat, looking delicate and pitiful. She thought that no man would refuse her in this way. Beligaju played with the car keys in his hand. His eyes were very light. He smiled, but his eyes were cold. "You'd better take your things out of the car." Choo-choo raised her eyebrows. It didn't matter that he was so cold. She still had a backup plan. "Sir, I know you are afraid that your girlfriend will misunderstand. We will explain to her later. We won't cause you trouble." Girls like Choo-choo always felt that when dealing with men, as long as you were pure enough, good-looking, and knew how to act coquettishly, no one could bear to. This was the easiest first step to get close to a man. But obviously, she didn't understand what kind of person Beligaju was. Just when she thought that she had successfully hooked up with Shunfeng Cheng, Beligaju turned off the engine and said coldly, "Get lost." Choo-choo was at a loss of what to do. Her entire body stiffened. She never thought that this would be the result. She stretched out her hand, wanting to tug on Beligaju's sleeve and act coquettishly. However, in the next second, Beligaju used an unknown object to cut open her neck. The thick smell of blood caused the originally thick hostility to spread to Beligaju's eyes. He looked at the girl in front of him and curled his thin lips into a faint smile. He was a demon through and through, always enjoying the taste of blood. He opened his mouth and gently licked the corner of his lips. Then, he slowly lowered his head towards Choo Choo. In that instant, Choo Choo was completely dumbfounded. A huge sense of fear was like an invisible hand, tightly squeezing her heart. She wanted to shout, but she found that it was difficult for her to even make a sound. When the girl saw this scene, she trembled and was about to take out her phone to call the police. Monster. That was a monster. Who would have thought that such a man would suddenly make a move on a girl? Although that face was still impeccably handsome, especially when the hostility was pervading, Beligaju looked more like a handsome vampire who had walked out of a movie. However, the fear was real. Choo Choo trembled as she listened to the man approach her and whisper, "Such a young body, the taste will definitely be very good." At that time, Choo Choo really thought that she would be killed by the man. However, in the next second, the man stopped and looked at her with a picky gaze. "No, it's not that smell. As expected, I still can't tolerate the stench of a soul." With that said, the man swung his hand and threw her out. It was as if he was looking at a pile of trash, as if he disliked eating. The two girls hugged each other and looked at the scattered snacks on the ground. They began to regret provoking such a man. They didn't know what had happened. However, demons were the most susceptible to the mental state of humans. The more they challenged the three views, the more shameless they were, and the more selfish they were, the more they could arouse the demon's nature. The darkness brought out by the girl's thoughts was like a nourishment for the demon. In addition, Beligaju was stained with blood, which meant that he was really starting to want to devour souls. Almost before they got into the car, Hellion Vivian could feel the hostility coming from the Wrangler. How could this be? Why was it so heavy? Hellion Wei furrowed her brows. Bailey Shangxie, who was taking care of his younger brother, also raised his head at this moment. A blood-red light flashed across his eyes. That was the effect between demons. She couldn't let Beligaju's demonic nature affect Shangxie. Little demons were immature and were the easiest to kill. This was Hellion Vivian's first reaction. Therefore, she gathered the spiritual aura in her body and turned to Bailey Shangxie. "Shangxie, take your younger brother back to the car. Don't go to the villa for the next few days, understand?" Bailey Shangxie realized that something was wrong, and so did Qing Chen. However, the two of them knew that they couldn't help at this time, so they simply nodded obediently. Hellion Vivian looked at the Wrangler that stopped in front of her. The man inside was smiling. It was still him, but his eyes were dyed red. "Get in." He thought that Hellion Vivian would avoid him. He also hoped that Hellion Vivian would avoid him. But when his thoroughly cold fingers were grasped in someone else's hand, Bailey Jiu somewhat stiffened. Not only was his thirsty appetite not suppressed, on the contrary, it made him very much want to eat this soul that belonged to him alive. "There's blood on it." Hellion Vivian acted as if she didn't see the change in him. She wiped his fingers clean and then said, "Our son will go to the car shop later. The two of us will go back to the villa. What do you think?" Beligaju smiled. "Very good." He didn't like anyone to disturb him. Hellion Vivian took back her hand. "Then let's drive. It takes a long time to make steak." They didn't waste any more time. The Wrangler's performance was very good. When the car drove out, the lines were unusually smooth. Qing Chen stood in the same place and looked at the Wrangler that disappeared into the traffic. His eyes dimmed. Bailey Shangxie reached out and held his hand. His thoughts were very clear. It was because of this that he knew why his mother wanted to send him and his younger brother away. His father was demonizing, a very serious demonization. It should be the side effect of tearing time and space. His father would devour souls like him. Or even more so than him. Because once his father's demonic nature was released, nothing could suppress it. Bailey Shangxie also knew that his mother was afraid that his father's demonic nature would affect him. The enchantment just now was the evidence. The only thing he could do now was to take care of his younger brother and stabilize the demon world. He didn't want them to be affected by his father and run around killing people. Bailey Shangxie held Qingchen's hand. The expression on his face was more serious than ever. Chapter 987. There was no sunlight in the villa all year round. Everywhere was filled with the faint fragrance of roses. The burgundy carpet was laid on the wooden floor, which made Bailey Jiaoju's skin look even whiter. That kind of whiteness was sickly, but for a demon, it was a normal thing. Hellion Vivian was frying the steak in her hand, looking at the figures outside the window. She narrowed her eyes, and when she turned her head again, there was a smile at the corner of her mouth. It's better to add some mint to the wine. I'll go out and get some. Okay. Beligaju smiled as well. His fingers brushed his thin lips, and the evil aura in his eyes began to churn with black fog. The effect of the demonization was bound to attract the people from the three upper realms. At this time, the figures standing outside wanted to kill Beligaju before he was completely demonized. Although more than a dozen people from Tiandao were no match for Beligaju, there was still a loophole in Beligaju's body, and they had a chance to make a move. During the demonization, there would be an hour when Beligaju would lose his ability to fight, and that would be the best time for them. The alliance between Tiandao and Buddhism was not something that anyone could resist. However, when they saw the phoenix bone knife in front of them, everyone's expression changed. Hellion Wei Wei was still wearing modern clothes, but as she slowly walked forward, illusory lotuses bloomed under her feet one after another. Amidst the gusts of wind from her blade, the crowd seemed to have seen the great Phoenix King who cleared the sea of blood. At this time, she still had the possibility of becoming a Buddha. Soon, the people from the three upper realms realized that this was going to be a tough battle. The man in the Kasaya looked up at Hellion Vivian. Phoenix, you shouldn't have stopped us. This time, we came for the righteous path of the three realms. The Emperor has begun to demonize. Do you want to see him become a murderous demon and destroy the three realms? It's better for everyone if you step aside now. It's better for everyone if you leave now. Hellion Vivian's voice was very cold, and the scimitar was surrounded by a fiery aura. The Voidwalkers immediately took a step back and looked at the woman in front of them. Only then did they realize that the phoenix standing in front of them didn't weaken after coming to the mortal realm. Instead, there was an unknown force supporting her, allowing her to not lose out to the Wisdom King of the Buddhist realm who used to wield the scimitar. Are we leaving or fighting? The 5 simple words were filled with an irresistible aura. No one dared to approach within 500 meters of the saber. The Voidwalkers looked at Hellion Vivian and said in a deep voice, "You will regret this, Phoenix. What you have done is not only a betrayal of Buddhism, but also a betrayal of the three realms of human, God, and Buddhism. None of them will tolerate you. You have protected one person, but you have pushed everyone in the world into the abyss of hell. Is this how you repay the true Buddha when he brought you from Mount Buzhou to the world of Buddhism? Where do you think the people of the world are? Everyone who loves you will lose their lives because of your decision now. Do you really want to do this, Phoenix?" The Voidwalkers roared the last 2 words. Hellion Wei Wei listened to the other party's words and her fingers tightened. Her voice was cold as she said, "If that day comes, I will leave this world with him. But before that, I will kill whoever comes." The Voidwalkers knew that they couldn't persuade Phoenix. It should be said that from the beginning, even the true Buddha couldn't persuade Phoenix. Phoenix's debt to the true Buddha had been repaid thousands of years ago. Now, it seemed that she was only protecting this one person. They had only seen such a phoenix when she cleared the sea of blood back then. At that time, she was covered in blood from head to toe with her saber on Mount Buzhou. No one could stop such a reckless phoenix. In order to repay Sakya's kindness, she became the Buddhist saber for thousands of years. She cleared the sins of the world and protected the righteous in the world. Now, in order to protect Beligaju, she was going to overturn everything. The Voidwalkers said, "You will regret it." But they never understood that this time, Hellion Vivian was willing to do it. Similarly, she was not lying. If such a day really came, it would be impossible. She would leave this world with Beligaju. But she would never tolerate anyone hurting him. The people of Tiandao knew that if this stalemate continued, there would be no consequences. The wind created by the rotation of Phoenix's bone saber was like a knife on their faces. They looked at each other and made a plan in their hearts. They had to retreat first. It was too difficult to deal with Phoenix by relying on Buddhism alone. They had to join forces with the people of Hades to attack together. Amitabha. The Voidwalkers shook their heads and disappeared with the people of Tiandao. But it turned into a sigh. Phoenix, why are you doing this? In the end, the only one who will be hurt is yourself. Hellion Vivian's back paused for a moment. She did not look back. Instead, she walked into the villa. As she closed the door, an invisible barrier rose behind her. The pure spiritual energy had the effect of purification. Although Hellion Vivian knew that purification was useless at this point, at least it could delay the time of Belegaju's demonization. You're back. Bailey Jiaju leaned against the wall and looked at her lazily. He was swirling a glass of red liquid in his hand. His deep eyes were dyed red with blood. Why didn't you let them take me away? Haha, what a stupid decision. It was obvious that he was going to demonize. At this time, no one would go near him. Belegaju laughed in his heart. His evil aura slowly surged out, echoing with the group of demons behind him. That kind of scene was like the blade of the greatest villain before he killed someone. It was terrifying and dazzling. Hellion Vivian looked at him and took a step forward. Suddenly, she hugged his waist and said in a low voice, "You're not stupid. Let's continue eating." Belegaju's body shook. The person in his arms was so warm. Compared to his cold body, when that person kissed him, it was so gentle. Hellion Vivian kissed him on the corner of his mouth. At least finish the steak. Belegaju did not speak. The empty part of his chest was a little warm. His red eyes gradually faded, as deep as the sea. He seemed to have thought of something, but he couldn't remember anything. In his memory, there was a small figure standing on the snow-covered mountain Tenya. She was wearing a blood-red kasaya. She handed him a steamed bun with a cold face. At that time, he thought that it would be good if this small figure belonged to him. So, even after they grew up, he would always call her Little Phoenix in his heart. It was just strange that he couldn't remember what she really looked like. Chapter 988. The only thing that filled his mind was the thought of obtaining it. However, demons didn't have hearts. The only thing that could make Belegaju chase after her was her scent. Presumably, her blood must be very sweet. Also, her soul seemed to be very delicious and smelled very sweet. Smelling the faint fragrance at the tip of his nose, Belegaju closed his eyes as if he was intoxicated. He stretched out his arm to hold her waist and the tip of his tongue seductively licked his thin lips. His fangs seemed to be gently rubbing against Hellion Vivian's neck as if he was teasing her. He had to admit that he liked this smell. He liked it very much. He almost couldn't wait to tear her apart. However, just as he was about to bite her neck, she hugged him tightly. That person hugged him tighter and buried her face in his neck. Her voice was a little hoarse. "Don't stand here. The sun is strong here. It's not good for you. Even if you want to eat me, this is not a good choice." Belegaju paused. She knew that he wanted to devour her. Usually, the souls that he devoured would either scream in fear or be confused by him and wrap around him like they were begging for sex. But obviously, she was different. She was protecting him. And very soberly, she used the tip of the knife to cut her wrist and then pulled him into the darkness. She touched his hair with one hand and put her wrist in front of him. That pair of clear eyes were like the stars in the night. "Drink." Belegaju didn't immediately act because he felt very comfortable. Her hand gently played with his hair like she had never been in contact with anyone before. Her hands were very soft and tender and successfully blocked the thirst that surged out of his throat. Bang! Bailey Jiaju took a deep breath and pushed her away. He turned on the shower in the bathroom and immersed himself in the scalding hot water. After his silver-gray hair was wet, it hung on the side of his ears, blocking all of his expressions. Hellion Vivian stood outside the door and looked at his blackened nails. Her eyes darkened. Belegaju seemed to be enduring a great pain, but that pain soon disappeared. He grabbed his collar with one hand, and when he looked up, his lips curled into a smile. His dark eyes were like a dream, gradually forming an invisible vortex, as if he wanted to devour everything in the world. The supreme demon king of the demon world. There was no one else who could captivate all living things more than him, free and unrestrained. When he had fallen from the heavens, he had been supported, hunted down, and infatuated by countless people. Now, he just wanted to taste what the person standing in front of him tasted like. The problem was that the other party was his exclusive soul. Strangely enough, he was unable to determine what the other party wished for. It was rare for Belegaju to be perplexed, but then he laughed evilly. Hellion Vivian looked at his wet appearance and didn't think too much. She picked up a white towel from the side, tiptoed, and covered his head. Belegaju took the opportunity to grab her waist and pressed his other hand on her injured wrist. Just like that, he pressed her against the wall. His breath was constantly changing, because the person in front of him was suppressing it, but also because of his thirst, he wanted to tear something apart. Demonization was very painful, but resisting it was 10,000 times more painful. Hellion Vivian couldn't bear to see Her Highness suffer, so she moved her wrist and put it on his lips. At that moment, Belegaju's muscles tightened, and he couldn't resist the burning in his throat. He lowered his head and bit the slender white wrist in front of him. The sweet blood melted on the tip of his tongue. It was the most wonderful soul he had ever tasted. This was the taste. This was the taste he really wanted. Demons weren't like vampires, they didn't need a lot of blood, but the blood from the soul could relieve a lot of their pain and let them confirm the taste of the soul. But everything was in chaos. Such a wonderful taste made Belegaju a little unable to control himself. He reached out and tore the cloth on Hellion Vivian's body. He pressed his palm on Hellion Vivian's waist and kept sucking on her wrist. He couldn't help but drink a few more mouthfuls. As a demon, he knew very well that he shouldn't eat souls like this, but the gaze of the person in his arms looking at him made him want to swallow her whole body into his stomach. Belegaju was very dissatisfied that he only tasted this little bit, but he couldn't really suck her dry. What he wanted was her soul. It was a complete soul. When Belegaju thought of this, he stopped and looked at the pale and colorless person under him. He didn't know why, but his originally empty chest seemed to have been filled with the northwest wind. It was wet and cold. Suddenly, his pupils shrank, and he quickly picked up Hellion Vivian. For the first time in his life, he panicked. His fingers tore the white cloth and wrapped Hellion Vivian's wrist. When the blood couldn't be seen, he reached out and pressed his forehead. He said in a deep voice, "You go to the car dealership, I want to stay alone for a while. Get up tomorrow." "No, leave today, I'll go pack up now." Hellion Vivian couldn't leave, so she refused directly. "Wherever you go, I'll be there." "Heh." Belegaju chuckled, pinched Hellion Vivian's chin, and began to talk nonsense. "Hellion Vivian, when did you learn how to pester other women?" "I said I was very annoyed and wanted to be quiet for a while." Hellion Vivian stood up, looked at him, and didn't give in at all. She only said 3 words, "I'm not going." Belegaju's fingers tightened, and his eyes fell on her wrist wrapped in white cloth, and his voice became colder. "What's the use of you staying here? Do you want to stop me from hunting? As long as it's my blood, you won't be demonized so quickly." Hellion Vivian pressed her furry head against his chest, and, "I want to accompany you, it's that simple." Belegaju resisted the urge to hug her, and smiled evilly. Phoenix, you haven't changed at all. You're so stupid, who do you really think will be by your side for a lifetime? Without Buddhism, Phoenix will definitely be vulnerable. It seems that all my inferences are right. If it weren't for you, those useless people from the upper realm would have rushed in, and I wouldn't have evolved to such a perfect state. But if you stop me from going out, it will only make people feel disgusted. To put it bluntly, I want to go out now to hunt and find a fresh girl. I don't want to drink your blood anymore. Phoenix, you're no longer useful to me. Chapter 989. Is that so? Hellion Vivian raised her head and looked at him. With a flick of her wrist, the prayer beads wrapped around her wrist immediately turned into a scimitar and directly slashed at her left hand. Clang! Hellion Vivian's hand was not cut. Instead, Belegaju's entire body surged with demonic aura and blocked the phoenix scimitar with one arm. His face was gloomy. "What are you doing? Didn't you say that you don't need my blood?" I'm just experimenting. Hellion Vivian's voice was very faint. As soon as her voice fell, she pounced on the man and pressed Bellegaju's entire body under her body. Her small face buried in his chest. Since I'm not important, why are you stopping me? Bellegaju's blood-red eyes looked at the ceiling. His hands were placed on both sides of him and firmly pressed against the floor. His hands were tightly clenched into fists. Because if he didn't do that, he would definitely not be able to resist hugging her, locking her in his embrace and then continuously hurting her. This person, why couldn't this person be like others and let him fend for himself? Why did she have to be so good to him, so good that he didn't even want to let go? I just don't want to force myself to drink blood that I don't like. You should also know that I can pounce on anyone I see now. Your experiment has no meaning at all. Even if it was another woman, it would be the same. Bellegaju laughed, his gaze cold. Also, I don't like people touching me. You better leave me now. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and looked at him. After becoming a demon, will people become stupid? Or do you really think that I'm stupid and can't see anything? Bellegaju, are you looking down on me? If you want me to leave you, you can just kill me. There's no need to say so much. Phoenix, when are you going to stop being so self-righteous? Bellegaju's voice turned cold. Hellion Vivian's expression was calm. Then just treat me as self-righteous. I'm the most suitable person to stay by your side. Others will only speed up your demonization. It's going to be dark soon. After dark, it's the most difficult. Don't think that you can chase me away and then go hunting by yourself. I want to watch you. Bellegaju opened his mouth. Hellion Vivian blocked him with one sentence and was very imposing. Shut up. If you talk nonsense, I'll take off all your clothes. Even if you go out, you'll be naked. Hellion Vivian's words were somewhat unreasonable. Bellion, he reached out and hugged her. He wanted to ask her, what about you? What about you? What? After demonization, no one would want to be near him. This person was still so stupid. Bailey Jiaju bit Hellion Wei's neck ferociously, but he did not break her skin. Instead, he patiently and gently kissed her skin. His voice was deep. Phoenix, you're really stupid. You've been so stupid since you were young. I was born from the chaos, not a god, not a demon, and not even a human. Why did you have to throw me a steamed bun, a vegetarian steamed bun? People from the chaos only eat meat, don't you know that? If I didn't eat, you would visit me every day. You're the stupidest person in the entire mountain tenure. Look at that time, no one dared to approach me, but you were so stupid that you left after putting on a steamed bun. When you walked toward me in your kasaya, it was already foreshadowing that you would be this stupid. You're attacking my intelligence again. Hellion Vivian reached out and hugged him tightly. His face was reflected in her eyes. She touched him with her fingers and smiled gently with some pride. I hate it when people reject me. If you don't eat, I will feed you every day. Later, you left. When we met again, you were a member of Tian Dao. Very arrogant. I wanted to snatch you from Buddhism a long time ago. Those old bald donkeys in Buddhism were not willing to let you go at all. However, you carried the wooden bucket and watered the Bodhi tree by yourself. If it were me, I would definitely not let you do these things, nor would I lock you in those dirty wooden huts and make you copy those complicated scriptures. You should be locked up with the most beautiful jewel chain. Those people have no taste at all. At this time, Bellegaju's voice sounded particularly pleasant. Demons were born with a bewitching sex appeal. As long as he wanted, it seemed that he could capture anyone. His fingers ran down Hellion Vivian's hair and dyed it black bit by bit. His eyes lowered. If I want to eat you next time, take your phoenix knife and stab it directly into my chest. Those people in Tian Dao and Buddhism always want to destroy me, but they never know that the only one who can really kill me is you. Remember, when I'm eating, I'm the most vulnerable. That's the best time to do it. Now, knock me out first because I want to kill too much. You don't want to see me lose my mind. Hellion Vivian did not reject Bellegaju's request this time. Now Bellegaju's breath was very chaotic and unstable. Hellion Vivian only needed to use a little skill to make him faint. At night, the darkness in the heart of the bustling city would be completely released. This was the demon's favorite energy source. All dirty thoughts originated from the human heart. Everyone who hid behind the internet would find a way to release their stress when they could not find a way to vent during the day. Snatching boyfriends, keeping mistresses, back and forth in the workplace, comparing and ostracizing in school, behind all these bustling activities were the nutrition of demons. Helene Vivian was very clear that Beligaju could not stay in the villa anymore. She wanted to go to a place with fewer people, the fewer the better. Almost without any hesitation, she used Beligaju's phone to call Azure Dragon and asked him to drive the private jet to the villa and not approach. Helene Vivian put the sleeping Beligaju into the pure black coffin that originally existed in the villa. The coffin was purified with Buddha beads around it. Demons did not need to breathe. The rose petals were scattered around Bailey Georgiou's body. His sleeping appearance was more innocent than any angel. His hands were placed in front of him, and his nose was straight. He was quiet and beautiful. Helene Vivian leaned over and kissed him on the lips. She had never told him. That little phoenix wanted to talk to him, so she threw meat buns to him time and time again. In fact, she had done this many times when she was in Buddhism. But only this one person gave her a response. Compared to those who saw her as a scourge, this young man with a straight back never showed her any malice, although he was very arrogant. But this did not stop Helene Vivian from throwing meat buns to him for the second time. Chapter 990. When she was the Wisdom King of Phoenix, Helene Vivian never knew what happiness was. Her hands were stained with blood, and she was not tolerated by Buddhism. Every time she returned to the Hall of Great Strength, people would avoid her because of the blood on her. She often did not understand why she was alive. She did not have the heart to save all living beings. Therefore, the older she grew, the more bored she was. She did things she did not like day after day. She had no friends, no one to talk to, and no freedom. She only had the supreme position of Buddha. She did not understand the compassion of all living beings that the Venerable said. Now, she looked at the person in the coffin. She finally understood. If there was really something to be touched, it was because of such a person that it became noisy. Therefore, she would never hand him over to anyone. Helene Vivian reached out and closed the coffin. Then, she called young Master Tang and went straight to the point without any preamble. I need a batch of fresh blood. It's best to get it from a regular hospital through blood donation. Did something happen to you? The man on the sofa stood up. He was dressed in a military uniform and looked at the night view outside the window. Is it related to your man? Helene Vivian did not hide it. She paused for a moment and said, I'll solve it myself. Hearing her words, the man did not ask more. His voice was very calm. What blood type do you want? I'll call and ask them to get a box of blood from the hospital. I don't want blood from the blood bank. I want blood from a donation. That kind of blood will not be too bad. Helene Vivian paused and said, I'm going to the Tibetan area. I need a local to pick me up. I understand. The man flicked the cigarette in his hand and said in a very pure voice, I'll ask the people over there to prepare the blood bag. But Weiwei, I want to know how long you'll be there so that I can be more prepared. Helene Vivian knew that she was a little panicked this time. Fortunately, young Master Tang reminded her. She stabilized her breath and began to think carefully. At least 10 days, at most a month. I don't know the details. There will be 2 of us, including me. It's best that we won't be disturbed where we are going. All right, fly directly to the address below. The advantage of having a private jet was that he could avoid a lot of investigations and go directly to where he wanted to go. However, the place that Helene Vivian went to this time was the largest uninhabited area in China. Qinghai Keek Shili, Level 1 Nature Reserve, snowline 3,000 meters. The terrain was high and the temperature was extremely low. Even Tibetans rarely lived in this area. Helene Vivian looked back at the coffin on the plane. This time, they didn't bring the pilot. Helene Vivian flew the plane herself. When the plane landed, the Tibetan antelopes drinking water by the lake seemed to be frightened and began to run wildly. However, this did not affect Helene Vivian at all. She opened the cabin door, and a person dressed like a Tibetan immediately ran over. The man was wearing a thick blanket and a hat on his head. He had one hand on the top of his head and his left hand on his chest. When he saw Helian Wei, he smiled and said, "Tashi Delay." The Tibetan's voice was very loud, and it always made people feel better. Helian Vivian took off the earphones on her head, looked at him, and smiled. "Tashi Delay. To be honest, I really didn't expect to get business in this season." The Tibetan looked at Helian Vivian's clothes and said in stiff Chinese, "You'd better wear more clothes. It's too cold here. The highest temperature is 5 degrees below zero. You definitely can't stand it. My name is Tashi, you can call me that in the future. At this time, no one will go to the mountain. You need a local guide, but the wind is too strong today and it's too late." Helian Vivian walked to the cabin door, and her smile did not change. "Thank you, Tashi, but forget about the guide. Young Master Tang should have told you. I'm going to the coldest side now. I'll drink the milk tea later. I have a luggage that looks a little big. I hope you can calm down when you see it. Don't be surprised and don't scream." Receiving business at this time, Tashi already knew that this would be a strange customer. After all, the people who came to Ho Sil were not normal. It was easy to lack of oxygen here, and there were very few people. It was difficult to know if there was any danger. "Okay." Tashi looked at Helian Vivian calmly. "But you must bring the tent up the mountain, and the sled dogs. They can still play a role." Helian Vivian nodded. "I'll bring the tent, but I don't need the sled dogs. I have a Tibetan Mastiff. It can help me." "Tibetan Mastiff?" Tashi looked around. Where was the Mastiff? Helian Vivian moved her fingers and chanted a spell. Her voice was low. "Little Black, come out." Tashi was still looking for the Tibetan Mastiff when he saw a black hound walking out from the depths of the cabin. Its body was surprisingly big. Probably because the color of its fur was too pure, when it stood in the dark, it seemed that its body was emitting a thick black fog. Was there a Tibetan Mastiff that big? Tashi was puzzled. He had seen a lot of Tibetan Mastiffs, and there were a few at home, but he had never seen such a big one. "I brought it here. Blackie has a good personality. You can put all the food I want on its back," Helian Wei said as she walked closer to it. At this time, She finally saw clearly what she was pulling behind her. His expression suddenly changed, but he did not say anything. Instead, he took out a rope and handed it to Helian Wei. "Do you want to use this? The iron chain is too cold to hold in your hand." "No." Helian Vivian smiled. "Young Master Tang is right. You are very professional." Tashi looked at the pure black coffin again. "Many people come here for sky burials, but this is the first time I see someone bringing a coffin. To be honest, it's quite scary. But Yuhan people have always been more meticulous than us. You probably want your friend to leave in a better state." Helian Vivian stroked the coffin with her fingertips. "He is not gone. He is sleeping. Maybe you can see him in the future." Tashi did not take Helian Vivian's words seriously. In his opinion, Helian Vivian just could not accept the death of her friend. After all, even the Tibetans knew that no one could be locked in a coffin and still be alive, unless the corpse came back to life. However, pure Tibetans had always been kind. Their true god Allah taught them not to blaspheme any soul, even if it was already dead. Chapter 991. She carefully prepared everything that needed to be prepared. What this guest wanted the most was meat and wine, and then some harmful fruits and a large barrel of pure water. These things were all placed on a raft, and then a rope was tied around the Tibetan Mastiff's body, so that it could carry these things forward. There was only a box of things, but She did not know what it was. When he pushed Helian Vivian away, he said in stiff Chinese, "This was sent by young Master Tang's people. It has just arrived in the tent. Do you want to take it?" "Yes, I need it very much. Thank you, Shi." The work of binding was done by Helian Vivian. After all, no matter how bold Shi was, he could not help but feel afraid when he saw the magic dog. After everything was ready, Helian Vivian's fingers clenched the iron chain and walked into the endless Ho Sil. The snow line of the plateau was white and misty. Every line on the continent symbolized the unique fierceness and strength of ethnic minorities. But what she did not expect was that Hellion Vivian did not sit on the wooden board like those who came to travel in the past. Instead, she walked in front of the black magic dog and put the hood of her coat on her head, only revealing her beautiful eyes. Such a person stood in the darkness, her dark windbreaker fluttering in the wind. Her steps were steady as she walked on the ice field. Her left hand was wrapped in pure white bandages, and her right hand was pulling on the iron chain. Her entire body seemed to be shrouded in a black fog that could not be dispersed. She was arrogant and omnipotent. She scratched his head. He always felt that such a person was really rare, but the taboo of doing business with customers was curiosity. So, she did not say anything more and turned to enter the tent. He had to welcome a small number of plateau explorers tomorrow. Hellion Vivian walked to the edge of the cliff and looked at the towering mountain peak in the distance, which was surrounded by wind and snow all year round. Without wasting any time, she began to bend down and set up the tent. Then, she put the coffin into the tent. At that moment, countless red spider lilies bloomed one after another, forming a strange and grand scene. Like a raging fire, every flower was in full bloom, delicate and alluring, carrying the fragility of the early morning, yet enchanting to the extreme, making people feel that they were extremely beautiful. Hellion Vivian's eyes darkened. She knew very well what the blossoming of the bouquet of death meant. However, none of this could stop what she was going to do next. Hellion Vivian opened the wooden box, her eyes still cold. If she knew what was inside, he would definitely be scared to the point where his face would turn white. She reached for 2 bags and placed them in the glacier outside the tent. Then, she lit the portable stove and added a piece of wood to it. When it was about time, Hellion Vivian pushed open the black coffin. The man inside was still sleeping peacefully. On his chest, a gorgeous datura flower bloomed. There were so many flowers, but only that one was deep red, as deep as blood. 2 sharp fangs protruded from his thin lips. That was a face that could turn all living things upside down. It was noble, elegant, and a work of God. He just lay there quietly, his slender hands slightly crossed, elegantly folded in front of his chest. His long and thick eyelashes fell down, forming a shadow. He looked like an innocent angel. But Hellion Vivian knew that he was not an angel. The fangs of the devil had been revealed. When this person woke up again, no one could guarantee what would happen. Hellion Vivian leaned against the coffin and slowly closed her eyes. She needed to rest, because only by ensuring that she had enough strength to deal with what was coming next. After a night of flying, Hellion Vivian quickly fell into a light sleep. When she woke up again, it was already 6 o'clock in the morning. There were only sporadic sparks left on the bonfire, and the surroundings were dark and silent. Vaguely, she seemed to be able to smell the scent of blood at the tip of her nose. It was very strong. Hellion Vivian immediately stood up and looked behind her. The black coffin was empty, but there were many empty blood bags in the tent. One by one, they were labeled with the blood type and the person's name. Hellion Vivian frowned and walked out of the tent. The thin fog on the plains had begun to fade, leaving only a vast expanse of white and green. It was a sign that the sun was about to rise. Beligaju sat on the glacier, his sleeves like flowers blooming against his fair wrists. He held a blood bag in his mouth, his eyes slightly narrowed, enjoying the pleasure of drinking. Although the taste of the blood was not the best. But, he was unusually hungry, and needed to fill something with blood. He saw Hellion Vivian walking over, and his thin lips curved into a devilish smile. His white fangs were slightly exposed, and there was a faint trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. Fortunately, there was no one in Ho Sil, otherwise, with Beligaju's appearance, anyone who saw it would cause an unexpected panic. He was still so handsome that people couldn't move their eyes away, but that sickly skin and slightly curved lips couldn't hide the evil. Human. Hellion Vivian noticed Beligaju's excitement, but the excitement of demons was always different from that of ordinary people. When they first entered the world, they were as pure as an angel with small black wings. In the end, after being muddled, they learned the human's obsession and greed incisively and vividly. So demons had all kinds of forms, but they were as elegant as magicians. They were evil to the bone, and people fell into it without knowing it. It smells so good. Beligaju threw the blood bag in his hand to the side. His voice was slightly low, his eyes looked at Hellion Vivian, and the tip of his tongue licked his lips. Hellion Vivian's heart sank. Had it already begun? She had completely lost her memory. Her Highness had forgotten about her. The weather outside was bitterly cold, and when the wind blew on her face, it was so cold that it hurt. Hellion Vivian's fingers were stiff for a long time before she recovered. She didn't touch the knife, but picked up the blanket on the side and walked over. It's cold here, next time when you come out, remember to wear something. Beligaju's eyes were deep. He looked at Hellion Vivian who was approaching him, and reached out to pull her into his arms. His voice was evil. So it's my master, no wonder it tastes so good. But what do you want to do by bringing me to this place? Stop me from hunting? Heh, you're really naive. In a place where there is no one, my body's aura can delay the spread of the demon in your body. Hellion Vivian looked at him without hiding. There is no human in a radius of hundreds of miles. No one will affect you, and you don't have to think about hunting everywhere. The blood bags in the tent are enough for you to drink for 7 days. Now, come with me first. Chapter 992. Hellion Wei glanced at him and said, "Don't try to lie to me. We can have hostility between us, and we can test each other, but don't put on an act in front of me. If you want to make me happier, put on the blanket." With that, Hellion Vivian stood up and hugged him again. This time, she wrapped him in the blanket and looked at him calmly. It was the first time that Bailey Jiaoju met a woman who could ignore his sexiness. He laughed in a deep voice. Then, he bent down and put his thin lips next to her ear. "Your body obviously likes me. I can feel it." Hellion Vivian looked up and said slowly, "Then, do you feel that even my heart likes you?" Bailey Jiaoju curled his thin lips and mocked the world. "You want to discuss love with me? That kind of illusory thing, only stupid humans would be deceived by it. My master, as long as you lie down obediently, I can let you enjoy the supreme happiness." As soon as he finished speaking, he kissed her behind her ear. Every inch of his lips carried a unique coldness. Hellion Vivian's body trembled and she wanted to push him away. Unfortunately, the man knew her every sensitive point. And Beligaju enjoyed the current position very much, especially when he kissed her neck with blood on his lips. That feeling was wonderful. Even the best virgin blood didn't give him such an intoxicating feeling. Every inch of her skin was trembling, every blood vessel was boiling, and every cell seemed to be slightly restless. Bailey Jiaoju lowered his eyes and looked at her slightly trembling shoulders. Guji, she could make him excited. Indescribable excitement. He was thinking about how to devour her later. Maybe he should press her under his body. He liked to see the pain humans showed when they were happy. So ruthlessly invade and love, let her cry under him and even beg for mercy. Thinking of this, Bailey Jiaoju used his strength and pressed Hellion Wei tightly into the tent. His nimble tongue overbearingly pried open her pink lips and swept across every inch of land that belonged exclusively to him. That was intolerable and irresistible heat with the temptation of absolute aggression. Until Hellion Vivian's whole body was weak and she was panting, the man let go of her slightly. His ivory fingers skillfully untied the blanket wrapped around her and gently stroked it down slowly. Lowering his head, his kiss fell on Hellion Vivian's collarbone. His big palm lifted her up and the tip of his tongue lingered slowly. He was not in a hurry and seemed to be enjoying it. His skills could even make an ascetic goddess fall head over heels for him. It was recorded in the Bible. The temptation of the devil was invincible. When Bailey Jiaoju felt the soft and smooth body under his palm tremble, the corner of his mouth raised slightly. So, he was more presumptuous. He wanted to get more of her shy reaction. More. Hellion Vivian knew that it was really difficult to refuse this man, but she still steadied her mind in the end. She pressed him with one hand, looked at him lightly, and said with a commanding tone, "I just want to see the sunrise, and you should need to drink another bag of blood." Beligaju stopped kissing. "My master, you are really smart. Devils are best at hunting when they are happy. I don't want to be eaten by you now." Hellion Vivian pulled his fingers over and held them. You don't have to think of ways to confuse me. I will tell you that wish when it is time to tell you. Beligaju knew that he was trapped. The eternal contract was originally like this. Before the time was up, the devil was not necessarily advantageous. But under normal circumstances, no one could resist his temptation. In the end, it was a wish that he could not pry into. Beligaju clenched his fingers, and there was uncontrollable hostility in his eyes. It seemed that this time, it would take some time to deal with this prey. When the time was up, he must completely tear her apart. After all, no one liked the feeling of being trapped. Especially Beligaju, who was a devil. Above the snow line, when the sun rose, it could almost illuminate the whole Hosil. That kind of beauty could not be described with words. Hellion Vivian was still wrapped in a blanket, and her back was against Beligaju's chest. When the sun was really shining, she pulled down the tent and pushed Beligaju into the shadow. Now you can't see the sun. What do you want to eat? I will make breakfast and bring it in. Me. Beligaju raised his chin and pointed to the blood bag on the ground. That. Hellion Vivian paused. There are other food besides blood. Since you know that I am a devil, don't expect me to live like a human, my naive master. Beligaju had a faint sneer at the corner of his mouth. It was obvious that he was unhappy because he had to stay here. Hellion Vivian looked back at him. There is your favorite chocolate. It has nothing to do with whether you are a devil or not. Beligaju didn't speak again. After Hellion walked out of the tent, she took a deep breath and then prepared breakfast. She was a very professional guide. He even knew very well what people needed most in this area. The other party was even considerate enough to fill the wooden box with beef that the locals liked to eat, as well as some unknown medicines that were used to deal with altitude sickness. On the snowy mountains of Hosil, the most common thing was lack of oxygen. Beligaju was fine, but Hellion Vivian, who took out all her spiritual energy to stabilize Beligaju, became like an ordinary person. Her physical fitness had always been better than others. After all, she had undergone special training. Even if she had some breathing difficulties, she could adjust herself. But at this time, she couldn't take oxygen. Once she got used to taking oxygen, she couldn't do without it. Hellion Vivian knew that she had another tough battle to fight. Of course, she did everything to the best of her ability. But here, no matter how tough Hellion Vivian was, she had to adapt to it. Chest tightness and breathing difficulties were common phenomena on the plateau. Hellion Vivian patted her chest twice, adjusted her breathing, and then carried the can into the tent. It was portable travel equipment that could heat up bread and milk in a short time. Even if Beligaju didn't eat it, Hellion Vivian still made two, but she replaced the milk with blood and the rest with chocolate. Hellion Wei extended her hand and pushed it in front of Beligaju. She smiled and said, "Go ahead and eat. After you finish eating, go to the coffin and lie down. It's not good for your health if you come out during the day. Is it fun for you to do this?" The corners of Beligju's mouth revealed a charming arc, but the words he spoke were like ice, extinguishing the warmth in the room. May 6, 2016, 21:40 Update 1. More. Chapter 993. Trapping me here and not letting me go anywhere, I won't let you go. You know very well in your heart that I haven't done anything to you because the devil's contract hasn't expired yet. Dying early or dying late is not the same. My master, you should be feeling very uncomfortable right now. Using all your spiritual energy to suppress the demonic nature in my body, aren't you afraid that before the time is up, I will kill you with my own hands? Hellion Vivian looked up and said two simple words, "I'm not afraid." Beligaju stood in the dark corner, and the fog continued to surge out from his body, indicating that he had begun to lose his patience. Hellion Vivian knew that what he said was true. Taking a deep breath, she directly picked up the cup, put it to his lips, and then drank it. Blood and soul had never been rejected by demons. The cold and sticky liquid in his mouth slowly slid across his gums, and every pore on his body was frantically opening and closing, desperately absorbing the nutrients in the liquid. This was Beligaju's current nature. He narrowed his eyes in enjoyment, and his white fingers seemed to be more transparent than the sky. Originally, there was an evil look on his handsome face, but now, because of the contrast of blood, it was full of demonic nature. He raised his head with the blood bag in his mouth, and his silver hair grew longer and longer, covering the ground. The second step of demonization. Belegaju's pair of eyes that had long been dyed red stared at Hellion Vivian, who was sitting on the ground opposite him, dark and gloomy, deep and confused. He knew that the hidden crazy gene in his blood was awakening. But he didn't understand why this person was so protective of him. She was clearly about to be swallowed up, so why did she look like it didn't hurt or itch? "Are you cold?" She reached out and hugged him again, like a cockroach that couldn't be killed, and looked at him very seriously. Belegaju's gaze landed on Hellion Vivian's pale lips. "You're the one who's cold, my master. You seem to have forgotten that I'm a demon. Demons don't sense any body temperature." Hellion Vivian was very honest with him. "Just like you said, I used my spiritual energy to suppress you. Naturally, you would experience altitude sickness. But it's better to be cold than to lack of oxygen. This land is the most beautiful place in our country. Some people come here before they die to have a sky burial. When I was very young, my father cheated on me, and my mother committed suicide. My inheritance was taken away from me, and my father sent me to school out of guilt. I've never liked going abroad, and I always felt that it was too lonely to stay there. After I met young Master Tang, I heard him talk about the plateau and snow mountains, so I really wanted to come and take a look. If you go further down, there are many vultures that feed on human flesh. If my soul is eaten by you, you can bury me here. I don't want to go back. Your body is also mine." Belegaju's eyes were filled with displeasure. "It's better to be eaten by me than by those messy things." Hellion Vivian chuckled. "You're right. Then can I hug you to sleep? I took care of you all day yesterday, and I'm a little tired. You don't have any body temperature, so you should feel more comfortable hugging me." Belegaju didn't refuse Hellion Vivian this time. Because demons had a strong attachment to their masters. Moreover, as she said, Belegaju didn't like the low temperature here. If he could sleep with a warm body, at least it would be better than sitting on the side. Seeing that he agreed, Hellion Vivian dragged the blanket over, then wrapped the two of them and lay in the soft coffin together. Outside the tent, only the cold wind could be heard. It was probably snowing, so everything was very quiet. Hellion Vivian tightened the blanket again, nestled in Belegaju's arms, and softly hummed a song. "If heaven and earth are really worth singing about, it's also because of you that it's so noisy. The big world is more hazy than you think. I don't have the heart to fool you anymore. I hope you can understand. Looking at the three realms, you can't find a second person like this." Belegaju listened to the coldness in his ears and reached out to hug Hellion Vivian in his arms. He thought that this would probably be the first soul that he could remember after he ate her. He should have found a treasure. No matter what she did, she wouldn't be annoying. Moreover, her voice was very pleasant to listen to, making people feel comfortable. She was very smart. She knew to prepare so much blood and then bring him to the empty depths of the glacier. This had a very good effect on suppressing his demonic nature. However, these were the things that he hated the most. He thought about why he had found such a soul in the first place, making him feel irritated even when he touched her. Irritated? Such emotions were something that he rarely felt anymore. Thousands of years ago, he looked at the world with eyes colder than God, and he could do whatever he wanted. However, soon, he was tired of power, tired of the world, tired of the night, tired of others bowing to him. He was not a human. In his dictionary, there was never the words birth, old age, illness, and death, let alone the Buddhist words of resentment, unrequited love, and parting with love. It was better to eat the food as soon as possible. Belegaju licked his thin lips, and a faint light rose in his eyes. Hellion Vivian also realized something. She suddenly opened her eyes and stood up. "You stay here, I'll go out and take a look. The people of Buddhism are here, I can smell their breath." Belegaju blocked in front of her. "Do you think I will let you go out like this? Let you join forces with them to deal with me? It's daytime now. If you betray me, I will be in trouble." Hellion Vivian smiled. Just when he didn't understand why she was smiling, she had already tiptoed and kissed him on the lips. Wait for me to come back. Belegaju wanted to hold the woman's wrist. At that moment, even he didn't know whether he was worried that she would betray him or that she would leave and never appear again. But soon, he smiled. As long as the time was up, the contract would take effect. No matter where his mistress ran to, as a demon, he would be able to sense her presence and eat her. So there was no need to worry at all. Thinking of this, Belegaju tightly grasped the blood bag in his palm. Clang! The teacup was smashed into pieces. Belegaju held his forehead with one hand, and blood dripped from his fingertips to the ground. Then, there was a low laughter, like the demon's Sanskrit, echoing in the tent. That's good. If she doesn't come back and chooses to betray or run away, I can immediately bite her throat as soon as it's dark. I saw the message. I was very moved, thank you. Chapter 994. For Belegaju, it was best that Hellion Vivian violated the Devil's Pact. In that case, he would not have to think of a way to get her wish. It was just that as time passed, Bailey Georgiou's eyes also followed suit and became extremely gloomy. It seemed that people were all the same. No matter who it was, they would choose to betray when they could save their lives. The same went for that woman. She probably took the opportunity to escape. After all, such an opportunity was rare. If she escaped to Buddhism, he would have to spend a lot of effort to hunt her down. However, these humans were too naive. Did they really think that he would not kill his way to Buddhism? Belegaju chuckled. His face was filled with unprecedented coldness. The demons behind him seemed to have sensed his rising anger, and layers of black fog surged out. Be quiet. Belegaju's eyes were deep red, and he turned around sharply. The demons immediately hid back into the darkness, afraid that their king would get angry and tear them all apart. The corners of Bailey Georgiou's mouth still carried a smile, but that kind of smile was too icy cold. He stuck out the tip of his tongue and evilly licked the blood that remained on his fingertips. Standing in the shade, his silhouette gradually became silent, a deathly silence. The demons hiding in the darkness knew that the more violent the king was, the easier it was for him to return to the peak state where he could summon the wind and summon the rain. They had begun to feel the exciting bloodlust around them. Although the demons didn't know why such a huge amount of coldness suddenly gushed out of their king's body, such darkness made them jump with joy, like black crows that had smelled their favorite scent. Every inch of them carried an invincible demonic nature. Outside the tent, snow was flying. Hellion Vivian was trapped in the middle by 8 holy monks. Each of them was holding Buddhist beads in their hands, wearing a kasaya, and surrounded by spiritual aura. Hellion Vivian's forehead was injured, but her eyes became clearer because of the blood flowing down, like the broken ice on the horizon. With the white cloth wrapped around his left hand, he held onto the hilt of his saber. The phoenix clear trace emitted waves of sharp cries in the snow. With one slash of his saber, the ground was broken and snow was sent flying. There were 10 people lying behind her. They were all sent by the heavenly Tao. They did not have the protection of the Buddhist Dharma, so they could not withstand Hellion Vivian's attack at all. However, the people who came this time were not only Tian Dao, but also the holy monks of Buddhism. They came specifically to besiege Phoenix. If these people really recited the Buddhist scriptures and formed a barrier, Hellion Vivian would have to use all her strength to deal with them. The holy monks also thought the same. They knew very well that Belegaju had not completely demonized yet because Hellion Vivian used her spiritual energy to balance him. In this way, Phoenix's attack power would be greatly reduced. The injuries on Hellion Vivian's body were the best evidence. The holy monks looked at each other and raised their fingers. The Buddhist scriptures kept overflowing from their thin lips. The scriptures turned into golden words, each of which could cut through the skin. Hellion Vivian avoided the first 4, but she could not avoid the last one. There were always blind spots in all directions. Her cheeks were cut, and blood flowed out. The holy monks were merciful after all. They shook their heads and said heavily in Sanskrit, "Your spiritual energy now can't stop us at all. After this battle, you will be exhausted and seriously injured. Let us go. Let us pass. He can't live anymore." There is no place in the 3 realms and 6 paths that can accommodate him. He came from the chaos. Without the divinity, he is the disaster of the world. If he doesn't disappear, you will be the one who disappears. As the leader of the Buddhas, why are you so stubborn? Hellion Vivian did not speak. Blood flowed from his fingertips and dripped onto the glacier, forming a bright red color that made people feel sorry for him. Swish. He did not give her a chance to dodge. Just as she was dealing with the holy light of Buddha, countless silver thorns broke out of the ground around Hellion Vivian's body. With a fast and arrogant manner, they pierced into her body bit by bit. Those were the weapons of Tian Dao. The silver needles transformed into vines that wrapped around her and gradually tightened. Every silver blade erupted with countless sharper needles. The needles pierced into her bones and densely tore apart her muscles. The extreme coldness was like venom that was injected into her body, oppressing her heart as if she was suffocating. Blood gushed out of her mouth. Holy monk, why do you have to say so much to her? As a Buddha, she can't distinguish right from wrong. Such a person should be eradicated. The person who spoke had known Hellion Vivian for a long time. No, it should be said that she knew the phoenix who had always been arrogant. At that time, fairies like them would always be forgotten in places where she appeared. They were obviously kinder than this woman. But Emperor actually fell from heaven and became a demon because of this woman and became a person of the 3 lower realms. What she disliked the most was Phoenix's appearance. A woman was just a little good at fighting and killing. She admitted that Phoenix was the only Buddha who could fight against Emperor. She was so powerful that she could even kill fairies like them with a sword. But now, the spiritual power in her body was not even 1/10 of what it used to be. Oh, what a mess. Phoenix, oh Phoenix, you also have a day like this. The woman of Tian Dao's eyes were obviously filled with jealousy. Phoenix, do you think you are very powerful? Even at this point, you still want to protect Emperor. To be honest, the person who hurt him to this point is you. The woman raised the soul-seizing needle in her hand again and stabbed it fiercely. Now that you have become his exclusive soul, why don't you just let him eat you? Why do you have to do such boring things? It's really annoying. Don't you know? What demons don't need the most is love. You are imprisoning him. Hellion Vivian's fingers shook. Those silver needles seemed to have found a loophole and stabbed deeper. It's time to end it. Look at yourself. It is because of you that you have implicated Emperor. The woman laughed, her face distorted. You don't know what he wants the most. You are never worthy of him. Stop talking. Hellion Vivian lowered her head, like a beautiful butterfly suspended in the air. But even in such a posture, it was difficult to reduce the coldness of her body. With an indifferent expression, she coldly spat out 2 words. You really don't change. Even now, you are still so arrogant. Do you know that your current appearance will only make people feel disgusted? The woman raised her left hand high, her eyes red like flames. He must feel the same, so go to hell. Chapter 995. Boom. Icicles swept up from the top of Hellion Vivian's head like a storm. The holy light of Buddha was enough to restrict Hellion Vivian's movements. This time, the phoenix would definitely not be able to escape alive. However, what the woman did not expect was that at that moment, Hellion Vivian suddenly raised her eyes. The cold cyclones flowing freely in the air seemed to listen to her command. Everyone said that the phoenix was bathed in fire. However, not many had actually seen it. It was a scorching heat that was emitted from the inside out. No one dared to approach it. The glacier behind Hellion Vivian collapsed one after another. She was still holding the phoenix bone knife in her hand. As it flapped, her entire body was covered with a layer of fire. The fire was like the most ancient totem, weaving the boiling blood sea of Mount Buzhou and the fiery wings of the phoenix behind her. The woman from Tian Dao saw this scene. Her eyes shook violently. This is impossible. You are not as powerful as before. How can you still? Hellion Vivian did not speak. She slowly pulled out the silver needles that were nailed to her. The blood on the back of her hand flowed to the ground, dyeing her windbreaker red. The phoenix feathers formed sparks in the air as clusters of them soared up with a crashing noise. Countless tiny snowflakes condensed into ice crystals that filled the air, refracting a resplendent ray of light that shone on Wei Wei's cold face. Her pupils were like a pure and holy twilight that could eliminate everything before her eyes. The woman wanted to escape, but she found that her 2 legs could no longer move. The flames that spread from her heels were burning her body. Almost in an instant, the ground shook violently. The phoenix's clear trace was enough to burn everything. The people from Tiandao and Buddhist Dao knew that it would be disadvantageous for them if they continued. They simply floated around and planned to wait for 2 days before making a move. Ho Sil, surrounded by snowy mountains, was left with nothing but emptiness after the battle. When Beligaju raised his head, he saw that Hellion Vivian was already standing in front of him. Her body was covered with cuts. She looked at him and smiled, "I'm back." Then, he collapsed. Beligaju didn't know why he protected her. He just felt that it was very dazzling. Every wound on her body was dazzling. "I'm fine. I'm just too tired. I'll be fine after some rest." Beligaju tightened his grip on her fingers, and his eyes darkened. She seemed to have regained some of her strength and hugged his waist. Her voice was hoarse. "I never thought of trapping you." Beligaju didn't say anything. The evil aura made him irritated. "But she's right. You became like this because of me. Shouldn't I stay by your side?" Hellion Vivian put her head on Beligaju's chest and then fell asleep. He had completely exhausted his physical strength and suffered from altitude sickness. Just like what the holy monks had said, Phoenix had sacrificed her vitality to protect Beligaju. The tent was silent. A little bit of cold air began to invade from all directions. Beligaju didn't say a word as he placed Hellion Vivian in the coffin. Then, he walked out of the tent. His black boots made a clear sound as he stepped on the snow. In the distance, the fairy who was on the verge of death saw Beligaju's figure, and her eyes suddenly lit up. "Di. Rip." A huge and resplendent flower of ice and snow bloomed on the fairy's chest. Its sharp and hard petals were extremely beautiful. They pierced through flesh and bone. Silver-white ice crystals that were like crazy vines pierced through the soles of her feet. They went all the way up her calves and thighs. Blood gushed out from her throat. She didn't even know why the man had made a move. Beligaju narrowed his blood-red eyes. He broke through the ground with a diamond-like coldness. "My soul, do you think you have the right to make a move?" There was a loud bang. In the distance, 2 people from Tiandao were shaken to the ground. Blood flowed all over the ground. Bailey Jiaoju stood there, his black robe fluttering in the wind. It was as light as a black smoke floating in the air, wrapping around his slender and powerful body. It turned out that although sunlight on him would cause harm, it was already weakening. It was obvious that his demonic nature was beginning to be able to cover up his spiritual nature. The situation was more serious than they had imagined. The people from both the divine and Buddhist paths thought that they could use this opportunity to eliminate Beligaju. But now, they realized that no one could stop him. The demonization was already set in stone. After dealing with the people outside, Beligaju returned to the tent. He looked at Hellion Vivian in the coffin, who was riddled with wounds. His gaze was a little uncertain. His fingers automatically stroked her hair, but he smiled coldly. "Stupid. If it was anyone else, they would have taken this opportunity to escape. But she was still stupid enough to stay and be his shield. This woman had no intelligence at all." Beligaju lowered his eyes and hugged her in his arms. His voice was faint. "If even you don't have the right to stay by my side, who does? As a master, how can you be so unconfident?" Hellion Vivian couldn't hear this sentence. She was in a deep sleep. She was in the right position, so she was even more so. "Stupid," Beligaju said in a low voice again. He patted her back with one hand. The demons hiding in the darkness didn't know why, but the darkness on their king's body was suppressed again. But they knew very well that this was only temporary. Once the time was up, their king would swallow the whole human into his stomach. In fact, this was indeed the case. Because in the next moment, Beligaju had already started to plan how to eat people. When Helene Vivian woke up again, she heard him whispering something in her ear. This was the unique hallucination of demons. It could make people reveal the deepest secrets in their hearts when they were unprepared. She looked at him and said with a tired voice, "There are still 5.5 days. It's easy to pass. Don't attack me when I'm unprepared. I can still help you deal with those Buddhists. You are indeed a little useful. But my master, aren't you overestimating yourself?" Belegaju reached out and pinched her chin. "Tell me your wish now. I can naturally deal with those Buddhists. It's just a few people and you're already so tired. How can you help me like this? Why don't I help you free, my dear master? Many people think that it's very satisfying to be devoured by demons. In fact, if it's you, I will treat you very gently. After all, you are very delicious." Helene Vivian coughed softly. Her head was also throbbing. In the face of Belegaju's words, she didn't reply. Instead, she hugged him and buried her face in his arms. She had already expected this result when she used her spiritual energy to balance him. She wanted to tell this person that soon, he would be able to return to his previous arrogant self. Chapter 996. But in the end, Helene Vivian still didn't say anything. She suddenly remembered that when she was looking for his soul fragment, he was shouting to let her go, but his hand was still holding on to her. This time was different from that time. He had really forgotten about her. Even if he remembered, she was just a soul that had signed a contract with him. "I need to sleep. There's a lot of fresh blood in the wooden box outside. If you're hungry, you can open it and drink." Belegaju was very clear about the condition of Helene Vivian's body. He bit open the blood bag and saw her breathing heavily at the side. He frowned. At night, Helene Vivian's high fever became more serious. She seemed to have a fever, but also seemed to be coughing. After the wound was infected, without spiritual energy to heal, it would indeed cause this result. However, the same thing was that demons wouldn't attack such prey. Demons liked to raise the most. If they wanted to eat someone, they would definitely wash that person from head to toe. So that night, the two of them were very safe. Belegaju didn't like to lie with others. He let go of the coffin and lay down in the tent with his arms behind his head. There was suddenly a blanket on his body. When he opened his eyes, he was already warm. The person in his arms was still very warm. It could even be said that her body temperature was too high. Belegaju frowned and then smiled wickedly. "Throw yourself into my arms. I'm a little cold. I think I have a fever." Helene Vivian hugged his waist and said in a deep voice, "Since I can't infect you, then hug me to sleep. You can't not cover yourself with a blanket." As a demon, Belegaju couldn't refuse his master's request. Only this woman was so stupid. She could clearly order him to do things, but she didn't let him do anything. "My master, you can order me." Belegaju lowered his head and kissed her neck. But in the next second, he frowned. Her body was too hot. Humans would most likely die if they did that. Belegaju lifted her face and said in a harsh tone, "Don't sleep. You brought so many things. You must have brought the medicine that you humans take. Where is it? I'll get it for you. Blood bag, below." After Helene Vivian finished speaking, she closed her eyes. Belegaju didn't waste any time. He stretched out his left hand and grabbed the wooden box. He flipped to the bottom and took out a box of powder. Thinking that this thing should be washed with hot water, a glint flashed across his eyes, and the bucket of water beside him began to heat up. After preparing the medicine, Belegaju wanted to feed Helene Vivian, but in the end, he felt that it was troublesome for a human to fall ill, so he took a big gulp and kissed Helene Vivian on the lips. The next day, his fever finally subsided. Of course, Helene Vivian knew that it was impossible for him to recover so quickly with just that little medicine. Her body was still very vain. She didn't know what Belegaju did to make her body temperature not so high. Helene Vivian was sweating all over and her windbreaker was stained with blood. She didn't need to look to know how pathetic she was. But what she didn't expect was that after sleeping for a while, the tent looked like it had been robbed. Especially the water and wooden box that she had carefully prepared, they were no longer in their original state. Things were overturned everywhere, and most of them were steaks and chocolates on the ground. Hellion Wei massaged her temples as she felt a headache coming on. She pulled the blanket and stood up. When she opened the tent, she saw the most beautiful sunrise. In Ho Sil, there were 3,000 people on the snowline. The man stood in the dazzling light. His face was as beautiful as an ice sculpture. His long hair, which was covered in snow, was scattered by his side. Under his black windbreaker, his feet stepped on the snow without a care. Black fog was emitted from his body. It was a darkness that could compete with the light. Hellion Vivian's heart suddenly sank. He was not even afraid of the sunlight. That also meant that he was one step closer to becoming a demon. As if he was aware of her existence, Belegaju slowly walked back. He reached out and grabbed Hellion Vivian. His slightly exposed fangs rubbed her lips. "Good morning, my master. The aura in your body seems to have weakened a lot. Those people from the upper realm have really done a good thing. Even if I don't know what the wish is, I can eat you in advance and leave this cold and lifeless place. You'll definitely feel cold standing outside." Hellion Vivian avoided the sarcasm in his tone and then held both of his hands. She lowered her head and blew 2 breaths. Her attitude was natural. "Is it warmer?" Belegaju's fingers moved. When the temperature that did not belong to a demon came from his fingertips, his chest felt empty. That emptiness made him want to destroy something more. However, he still resisted. After all, it was daytime, not nighttime. When the 4th night came, his demonic aura would be further released. During the day, it was time for him to rest. No matter how vicious Belegaju was, he would always be gentle to Hellion Wei. This was the nature of a demon. He was elegant and indifferent to outsiders. But he was patient enough to treat his master. Not to mention a master like Hellion Vivian. She was different from all the humans he had met before. Because no one would hold his hand and give him warmth. Some people felt that he did not need it, and some people did not dare. And this person seemed to be really not worried about being swallowed by him. "Thank you for yesterday's medicine." Hellion Vivian hugged him. She did not know why, but ever since she came here, she wanted to hug him more and more. "I'm very happy." Belegaju's thin lips were close to her ear. His voice was still pleasant to hear. "This kind of thing is what I should do. An unhealthy body will not be too delicious to eat. Okay, go eat something. Your body needs these." "So that's why." Hellion Vivian's voice became very low in an instant. Belegaju chuckled. "What else did you think it was?" "Yes, what else could it be?" Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes. Although she told herself not to care, it still hurt a little. "It's nothing. It's just that when you made the medicine, you made the tent look like it had been ransacked. It's a little strange." Belegaju paused. Indeed, according to the requirements of a demon for beauty, everything should be done in a calm and unhurried manner. At that time, he seemed to have forgotten to care about that. However, it was just a small matter in the end. What Belegaju cared about was when he could dig out the heart of the person in front of him and eat it bite by bite. Chapter 997. Demons ate from the heart. Therefore, Belegaju couldn't help but hold Hellion Vivian's soft hand. "Master, do you really not need me to warm you up with my body?" "No need." Hellion Vivian pushed him away, her eyes clear. "If you really don't have anything to do, help me fry a piece of steak." "Steak?" Belegaju snorted. "Human food." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "So, you know how to cook?" "No." Belegaju's voice was very calm. Hellion Vivian nodded. "Then today's order is to fry a piece of steak for me. I'll watch you from the side." Belegaju smiled. "Master, are you sure you want to waste your order on such an unimportant thing?" "This is very important to me." Hellion Vivian looked at his insufferably arrogant appearance and felt her heart soften. She turned her head and kissed the back of his hand. "I haven't eaten your food yet." As a demon, Belegaju certainly wouldn't refuse his master's request. He curled his thin lips and said in a magnetic voice, "As you wish, master." It had to be said that Belagaju would do everything perfectly. The steak was ready-made. Once the things in the packaging were removed, placed in the pot, and added oil, it would be able to fry a good steak. Belagaju walked over with a plate. Just like how Hellion Vivian served him breakfast before, this time he poured milk for her. The cutlery wasn't perfect, so Hellion Vivian skipped the tedious details. She ate a mouthful of meat and a mouthful of milk, but she ate a little slowly. In fact, her appetite wasn't very good. Eating steak wasn't the best choice after just being sick. She just wanted to replenish her energy and for convenience, forced herself to eat 2 mouthfuls and some fruits. Belagaju looked at her from the side and frowned. Then, he took the plate away and poured all the meat into a plastic bag. Then, he took out a tissue and wiped his fingers. If you don't want to eat, then force yourself to eat. Don't you know what's good for you humans when you're sick? Hellion Vivian paused. She didn't think too much. Besides, did she really want that certain highness, who didn't touch the sun and spring water, to make soup for her? There were ingredients. The radishes and chicken were wrapped to withstand the cold. What else are in the boxes you brought with you? Belagaju's voice was very indifferent. Since you plan to stay here for 7 days, it shouldn't be just this meat. Hellion Vivian watched the man leave this sentence and began to rummage through the boxes. She finally understood why the tent had become like that. Looking at Belagaju's side profile cooking, she felt that it was a very beautiful thing. Although his eyes were still shining with a bloodthirsty light, his tall and slender back view was still reassuring. The tip of the demon's tongue didn't seem to be very sensitive to human food, and Belagaju couldn't taste the saltiness of the soup. After cooking for a while, he scooped out a little with a spoon for Hellion Vivian to taste. He gave off a very serious feeling. Hellion Vivian had never doubted that Her Highness was a good man. Even if he had become a demon, everything he did was just to be able to eat her well. However, looking at Belagaju frowning and staring at the fire, Hellion Vivian easily fell asleep. After tossing and turning for a long time, when the fire was finally turned off, the person who was going to feed the soup sat there and fell asleep. Belagaju stopped what he was doing and bent down to look at Hellion Vivian. Then, he slowly bent down, picked her up, and put her into the coffin. Then, he walked out of the tent. At this time, a mountaineering team was resting in the lee of the glacier. Several members sat around the smokeless stove and were heating special dehydrated beef to replenish their strength. Everyone, hurry up and eat. After eating, we will go east and see the Tibetan antelopes drinking water. Jashi was sitting by the stove. There were not many people who dared to be a guide in Hosil. After all, this place had not been civilized. A mountaineer adjusted the camera and said without raising his head, "I have just seen the east. There is nothing special. The scenery is almost the same as the one we walked all the way here. I want to go from the west, towards the snow mountain. I heard that you can see the glacier and Mount Everest there. Jashi, take us to the west." "Yes, Jashi, go to the west. We all want to see the snow mountain closer." The person who said this was a female mountaineer. She was fully dressed and wore a pair of goggles on her head. She lowered her head and took 2 breaths of oxygen. "Don't worry, we are all scientists. We will not do anything to harm ourselves." The technician also turned his head. "If it really doesn't work, we can still pay more. This time, we came out to better understand Hosil. If we don't photograph the snow mountain and the glacier, the information will be missing. We are now working on a project in the Tibetan area. Jashi, I hope you can support this work. I am very sorry, my honorable guest." Jashi said this sentence in Tibetan. Then, he realized something and switched to Chinese. "We have our own rules. Allah told us that the most taboo thing to do in Hosil is to go near the snow mountain. This is not a matter of money. I brought you here, so I will bring everyone back safely. Moreover, I promised my boss that I will not go near the west during this period of time, so I am very sorry." The female mountaineer had a pair of binoculars around her neck. She raised it up and laughed. "Jashi, everything is negotiable. Do you think that the price is too low? We can all increase it. Don't tell us the story of Allah. If the snow mountain is really so dangerous, There will not be a tent there. There are obviously people there. There is a tent beside the snow mountain. The technician was excited. He raised his binoculars and looked in the direction that the female mountaineer said, "How is it possible? There is really a tent. What kind of people lived there? Are they local Tibetans? Didn't they say that this is a no man's land with no signal and no people?" Just when everyone wanted to take a look, Jiashi knocked the binoculars out of the technician's hands. "What are you doing?" The technician jumped up as if he had been stung by a bee. "Jiashi, do you know how expensive this thing is?" Jiashi ignored his words and still did not let them see. "We can't go to the west of the snow mountain. Let's go back the way we came. Don't go any further." Everyone was in an uproar when they heard this. The technician sneered, "Why go back the way we came? We just want to go to the snow mountain to have a look." Chapter 998. Jiashi looked at him. His Chinese was still stiff, but he clearly expressed his displeasure. "I once said that you have to listen to me when you reach Ho Sil. The original arrangement was to go to the east. If you don't want to continue, just turn around and go down the mountain. This matter is over. Going to the west is not within the agreed range. I won't accept it." "You." The technician still wanted to argue. The female member stood in front of him with a camera around her neck. "If it's because of your belief, you can choose not to go there. This is not against the rules." "No, in my opinion, this is against the rules." Jiashi was very insistent. The female member smiled and shook her head. "That's why you Tibetans are so stubborn. But we are different. As long as there is enough oxygen, there is no reason to stop us from going to the snow peak." As she spoke, the female member turned her head. "Everyone, get ready. Those who want to go to the snow peak can follow us. We have instruments in our hands that can accurately distinguish between north and south. Those who are timid can follow Jiashi back. After all, it is understandable that no one stays behind to take the risk." This mountaineering team was too young. The consequence of being too young was that it was easy to forget to listen to other people's opinions when they encountered the scenery that they liked. In Ho Sil, a Tibetan was worth more than 10 instruments. This was nature. Only those who lived here knew where to go and where not to go. Jiashi was betrayed by his friends and no one listened to him anymore. However, he could not leave these people alone. The wolf dog ran happily behind Jiashi, but it still did not want to go to the snow mountain in the west. This meant that it was very obvious. In this land, animals were often more sensitive than humans. The wind and snow continued. The higher they went, the colder it became. At the same time, it was accompanied by a strong altitude reaction. Several members of the team took turns to take oxygen after walking for a while. Just like what they said, it was very convenient to carry a device with you wherever you go. In fact, it was more tiring to walk on the plateau more than 6,000 feet above sea level. They thought that the snow mountain was very close, but it took them 5 hours to walk. When they arrived at their destination, the sun began to set. People who lived in Tibet all knew that. Do not walk outside at night. If it was too dark, you must go back to a place with people. This was the rule. Once again, Jiashi stood up and tried to get them to return to the team. At night, there will be wolves and avalanches. These glaciers might even melt. Do you understand? The inspector held the camera with one hand, and only the beauty of this place was left in his eyes. It's really a paradise on earth. Why didn't I discover such a beautiful place earlier? Jiashi clenched his fists. Why didn't these people listen to him? The female team member was polite, but her words were always a little hypocritical. Jiashi, you have a dog by your side, and we all have torches. I have also played in the wild before. They are just wolves, and they are afraid of fire. That's because you haven't seen a pack of wolves. Jiashi blushed and said in Tibetan, "We must go back immediately." The female team member disagreed. When she picked up the binoculars, she caught a glimpse of something. Tents. There really are tents there. Jiashi also paused for a moment because in his impression, no one would dare to camp here. Even they would not choose to spend the night in the no man's land because it was too dangerous. After all, the wolves in Ho Sil were much more ferocious than these people imagined. For a moment, Jiashi thought of the employer who dragged the coffin into the night. Could it be that the tent was hers? Before Jiashi could stop them, the mountaineering team had already strode toward the tent. At this time, something strange happened. The wolf dog that Jiashi brought refused to take another step forward. Instead, it seemed to have foreseen something terrible and curled up into a ball, shivering. "Look, what is that?" The female team member breathed heavily, and her eyes were full of amazement. There was no wolf pack here, and there was no danger as the guide had said. On the contrary, 3,000 meters above the snow line, there was a man sitting beside a glacier cliff. He had an excellent figure and was wearing a cloak. He was like a silent and valiant snow leopard, only revealing a pair of deep eyes. He was so handsome that it was as if he had walked out of a manga. "Is he a local?" The female team member guessed excitedly. She walked forward and said in Tibetan, "Jiashi, here you are." Belagaju listened and tilted his head, revealing a charming smile and a bewitching voice that demons were best at. "You smell so good." The female team member was stunned and blushed uncontrollably. At this time, she did not realize that Belagaju had another meaning when he said that she smelled good. She thought that it was the essential oil of the perfume on her body that had played a role in it. "You can speak Chinese?" The female team member smiled again. "That's great. Just now, our guide said that there was no one in this place and it was very dangerous. He told us not to come. It seems that there is no danger here at all. Instead, there is a handsome man." Belagaju lowered his head, and the cloak cleverly blocked his completely black nails. He stuck out the tip of his tongue and licked it. The corner of his mouth lifted into an elegant arc. "It's a fragrance that I haven't smelled for a long time. It can easily make people fall." The female team member's face became even hotter, but when she saw the wine glass in his hand, she could not help but be curious. "How can there be such red wine? Won't the wine on the plateau freeze?" "This is not wine." Belagaju did not raise his head and smiled. "This is blood, very fresh blood." His voice was very low, and even pleasant to the ears. However, when it reverberated through the endless snowy mountains, it caused everyone to fall silent. After a while, the female team member smiled awkwardly. He, you are really humorous." "Humorous?" Belagaju raised his head. His silver hair fluttered in the darkness and his fangs were slightly exposed, making him look extremely evil. The female team member's face immediately changed. She took a step back and wanted to escape. However, it was too late. A mocking smile appeared in Belagaju's eyes. Then, he moved. It was the kind of movement that flashed by, as fast as the speed of light. He, who should have been sitting in the snow, appeared in front of the female team member in the blink of an eye. His left hand firmly gripped her neck, and the wind blew his silver hair into a mess. His scarlet eyes no longer had the usual laziness, the occasional evil charm, and the impatience he had when facing Hellion Vivian. There was only killing intent and coldness. The most important step in the demonization of a demon was the rendering of human desires. And today, Belagaju had finally completed this step ahead of time. Chapter 999. Save me, Zhongming, Li Yang, come and save me. The female team member was trembling all over as she screamed shrilly. However, the team members who had boarded the ship were already scared out of their wits. How could they go forward? They all dropped their cameras and ran away. No one dared to look back, as if there was an unknown monster behind them. Belagaju smiled, and the black gas lingered around him. This is the reaction that a human should have. Fear, betrayal, it has been like this since the beginning. Didn't you blush when you saw me just now? Why, I just started to show my original appearance and you are already scared. Ha ha ha. No, don't. In the tent, the sick Hellion Vivian suddenly woke up. She arched her body and rushed toward the glacier like an arrow released from the bow. There was a loud bang. The phoenix blade slashed out a fierce flame. Hellion Vivian grabbed the female team member's arm and said in a low voice, "Ju, stop. Don't steal my prey, and don't get in my way." In the wind and snow, Belagaju did not let go of the woman in his hand. There was no expression on his handsome face. "Otherwise, I will kill you too." Hellion Vivian did not speak, nor did she give in. The smile on Bailey Jiaju's face deepened. "So, do you want to be my enemy now, my naive master?" The cold wind suddenly tightened, and the snow swept past like a sharp blade, lifting the corners of their clothes at the same time. Hellion Vivian knew that once a human appeared at this time, the demon in his body would be completely activated. However, Hellion Vivian did not expect such an accident to happen. She tilted her head and looked at Jiashi. Jiashi did not escape, but his face was extremely pale. He suddenly remembered that night when he received Hellion Vivian, he saw a pure black coffin. She said that she would wait for a chance to let him see the person she liked. He always thought that it was an unfulfilled wish, but now it seemed that the man in the coffin was a demon. Jiashi didn't know what to do. He was very worried. Hellion Vivian turned around and looked at Belagaju. Her voice was light, but her breath was still warm. "I don't want to be your enemy. It's just that I don't like you touching other women. Do you think I'm just saying that I like you? Belagaju, don't forget that I'm the one who made the contract with you. You're mine." Belagaju was still thinking about what kind of angle to stab his fangs into the female member's neck. But now, all the thoughts in his mind were gone. All that was left in front of him was that stubborn and good-looking face. How could there be such a person in this world? She was smart and pure. She could speak so openly, so pure that only the instinct to possess her was left. It was an uncontrollable desire that came from the depths of his body. Green veins protruded from his handsome and resolute face, and his eyes were faintly discernible with hostility. A strong desire to, "I want more," the desire in his heart kept rising. The taste of this person made him crazy. The thirst in his blood made him want to pounce on her and devour her soul. His remaining reason restrained him, telling him that he couldn't do that. But his sharp fangs couldn't be retracted. He had to eat something. Bailey Jiaju turned his head and fiercely bit in the direction of the female team member. Hellion Vivian raised her hand and used her arm to replace the female member's neck. The pain instantly spread to the entire body. When the female member saw that she was saved, she began to flee in panic, not caring about what Hellion Vivian would do. The first thing to do when the demon was aroused was to consume. But just like what Hellion Vivian said, she didn't like him to be tainted with other people's scent. She didn't want to see his hands stained with blood. In Hellion Vivian's heart, this man had always been the young man she saw on Mountain Tenya. He was clean, upright, and unapproachable. Only such a person was not afraid of gods and Buddhas, and was arrogant and independent. After the young man left, Hellion Vivian didn't go there to eat buns for a long time. Such a person was, in fact, very gentle. He didn't reject her, and even brought her to many places in the future. He said more than once that he wanted to lock himself up, but he was the one who gave her the most freedom and companionship. In the past, she used to talk to Body, and there was no response. She didn't know how to communicate with others, and was very serious in everything she did. Every time she went to his temple, her hands would be wet. The venerables of Buddhism would avoid her when they saw her, and only he would frown and hold her hand to wash her hands. She was a boring person who didn't know anything, and when she crossed out the things that she had to do every day, he would indulge her. But at that time, he had a pile of things to deal with. Get lost. Belagaju's voice was very cold. His fangs were still stained with Hellion Vivian's blood, but she didn't exist in his eyes at all. His eyes were fixed on the female team member not far away, and the strong murderous aura caused the sky to be filled with frightening dark clouds. Hellion Vivian didn't move, of course. Countless black fog rose behind Belagaju, and his tone was extremely cold. "My naive master, you should learn from normal humans. Look at what they do, and if you do the same, I won't hate you so much. You're right, if you stay by my side, I don't know how many times happier I will be. You're the one who restrained me, so I'll say it again, get lost. I want to hunt. Hate." When she heard this word, Hellion Vivian's heart, which didn't have much strength, clenched fiercely. She raised her head, looked at the man who was about to complete his demonization, and hugged him without hesitation. Her voice was a little hoarse from the pain, Now I understand what you said before. I really want to lock you up, and not let anyone see you. Don't eat other women, I'll give up using my spiritual energy to resist, and you'll easily suck me dry. I'm the one you want the most, isn't it? Of course. After Beligaju heard Hellion Vivian, he smiled evilly. He reached out and lifted Hellion Vivian's chin, and kissed her lips. He was completely heartless like a demon. If you're willing to give yourself to me, I won't let myself suffer and eat those inferior souls. After saying that, he lowered his head and fiercely bit Hellion Vivian's throat. His black nails cut open her clothes, and pierced her skin. Every bite was like a kiss, but it was real damage. He gently licked the blood, and coaxed naturally, "My delicious master, now can you tell me what your wish is?" Chapter 1000. The demonization was complete. Beligaju, who was exuding a black fog, was like a red spider lily in full bloom in the demon world. He was incomparably handsome. He sucked the blood and raised his head slightly. The lines of his jawbone were like a quiet bay. Behind him, huge wings spread out without warning. The black feathers that symbolized sin, darkness, and greed fell one after another. The demon's song played. Together with his wings, they slowly flew, as if they could embrace the stars in the sky. Hellion Vivian knew that she couldn't stop it. Enduring the pain, she reached out and wrapped her arms around his waist. Just like before, she wanted to give him warmth, but her breath became very weak. At that moment, even her lips were pale. Only the tears in her eyes were very gentle. "I want you to be happy and not be alone. This is my wish." Hearing this, Beligaju's body suddenly shook. No one had ever made such a wish for him. He remembered the day of the fall. He was thrown into the flames of hell and endured unbearable pain. The real fall only began in the third hell. His soul would be completely crushed. Every bone seemed to be in pain. No one would think for him. But at that time, what was he thinking? Revenge. Beligaju's stiff fingers tightened around Hellion Wei in his arms. The light in his eyes gradually condensed into a single spot, converging into a blood-red pattern. The softness in his arms made him stop moving. Something important was disappearing little by little with the blood flowing out of her chest. It was a feeling that he hadn't felt for a long time. She lay in his arms. Her pale face had long lost its original vitality. She was like an obedient puppet. In the past, he had thought of destroying her countless times. But the moment she really lost all her warmth, he felt an unprecedented emptiness. Was this feeling good or bad? No one would be able to restrain him anymore, and his chest would no longer be as restless as before. He had wanted so much to get rid of this feeling. If he could finally get rid of it, and she would never appear in front of him again. Why did he feel like he was drained of all his strength? As her blood seeped in, something surged up bit by bit. There was one person who never let him live in peace. He had been very shrewd since he was young. He always wore a kasaya that did not fit his figure and the sleeves were not right. However, he liked to run around Mountain Tenya with water in his hands. He did not look like a little monk at all. She was like a cat. After seeing you, she would first throw you to steamed bun and observe you for a while. She would only approach you when you were good to her. But later on, you realized that she wasn't a cat, but a canine. Giving without expecting anything in return. It was a look of complete trust. There was also the gentleness of putting all her eggs in one basket. She will take whatever you say seriously. She was obviously very smart, but she would clumsily lie on the table and carefully remember what the two of them did. Only then did Beligaju remember. When he fell from the heavens and became a demon, he never thought about revenge. Instead, he thought about his little phoenix. Without him, would she be bullied in Buddhism? During the twilight of the gods, what he thought the most was that she would push him down, then lean into his arms and hug him domineeringly. It was such an important thing, how could he forget? Beligaju's black-gloved fingers dug into his palms. He hurriedly wiped the blood for the person in his arms. No one could see his expression clearly. He hugged Hellion Vivian and knelt down on his knees. With one hand hanging down, his entire head was lowered. This person did not kneel to the heavens or the earth. He was not afraid of gods or Buddha, but at this moment, he was like a defeated army. Huge cracks appeared on the glacier around him one after another. Countless man-eating black crows rose in an instant. Big birds flew across the snow mountains, raising their heads and crying. Suddenly, a hoarse voice rang out between the heavens and the earth, spreading to every corner of the world. In this world where demons and monsters were running rampant, all the ghosts and monsters trembled in fear and involuntarily revealed their true forms. That was the roar of the leader of thousands of demons. That was the sadness that reached the depths of the human heart. That was the hatred that could penetrate the 18 layers of hell. The roar shook the gate of hell. The reapers could not help but tremble. They looked at each other. The chains in their hands that were used to bind souls were shattered by the invisible devil energy. In the car shop, Hellion Qingchen, who was washing her hair, suddenly sat up straight. She did not care about Bailey Shangxie, who was still flushing her behind, and ran out. Bailey Shangxie pulled him back and patted him on the back with his blackened fingernails. He did not say a word and looked very cool. Hellion Qingchen suddenly realized that her brother was the most uncomfortable at this moment. She hugged Bailey Shangxie and said in a muffled voice, "It will be okay. Believe in beauty, Hellion." Okay. Bailey Shangxie did not tell Hellion Qingchen that his change meant that his father had lost his humanity. Even if something really happened, he had to stabilize himself and take good care of his younger brother. Hellion Qingchen also did not let Bailey Shangxie worry. She even knew that it was more important to help her brother hide his identity at this time. She covered Bailey Shangxie's ears with her small hands. After entering the car shop, she took a big windbreaker and covered Bailey Shangxie with it. The two little people snuggled up to each other and sat in the corner. They had never been so well behaved before. The sun gradually set and the sky was full of splendor. It was the real time to meet the devil. Beligaju carried Hellion Vivian and walked towards Jiaxi. His long hair fluttered in the dark. His footsteps were crisp and clear. It was the sound of the ground being crushed. She could no longer feel anything from this man. Pride, elegance, contempt, mockery, weakness, and cruelty. He just walked. His long and thick eyelashes were stained with snow. Jiaxi was dumbfounded. He did not know how to react at all. He could not believe that all the glacier around him had collapsed, but he was the only one who was still intact. Jiaxi would never know that Hellion Vivian's last glance saved his life alone. No one could have predicted that this would be the result. The climbers who were eventually buried in the overwhelming avalanche never thought that they would lose their lives because they didn't listen to others' advice. If it were not for the female climber's approach and the dirty thoughts in her heart, Beligaju might not have been demonized in advance. But everyone knew that things would eventually come to this point. At night, under 90 or 80 miles of snow, the red spider lilies were in full swing, floating on a dark river. It was indescribably beautiful. Chapter 1001. In the river, a small boat suddenly appeared. This river was called the Styx River. It was the river of life in the underworld. Souls that couldn't ascend to heaven floated on it, like rising clouds. Beligaju stood at the bow of the boat, wearing a black cloak. He quietly held the bamboo pole and lowered his head to look at Hellion Vivian in the boat. She didn't open her eyes, but he could hear her voice. "Where is this?" she asked. Beligaju smoothed her messy long hair. His slender straight face had an unprecedented gentleness. The Styx River. Then, his thin lips fell on her forehead. That small face still showed no signs of waking up, and there was no grief. It was just very quiet, so quiet that it was peaceful, and even smiling. The place where demons devour souls. Hellion Wei couldn't see anything as she was immersed in a black fog. The only thing she could feel was his slightly cold lips, carrying a unique chill as he comforted her. Hellion Vivian asked again, "Are you going to start eating my souls now? They seem to be leaving my body." "Sure." He stretched out his hand and pressed his finger on her pale thin lips. "Don't talk. Sleep for a while. You need to rest." In her deep sleep, Hellion Vivian sighed. "Okay. Good girl." He always treated her in the most doting way. Even when he was about to devour her, he still treated her with the same gentleness. Belegudeux stretched out his hand and put Hellion Vivian in his arms. Her beautiful upper body was naked. The black cloak that was originally covering her outside had become her protection against the cold. But Hellion Vivian didn't want to sleep. She still wanted to talk to him. But just like what Belegudeux said, she had no strength left. If it wasn't for the extremely low temperature in Ho-Sil, she was afraid that she would have died directly in the snowy glacier and wouldn't have dragged on until now. Hellion Vivian realized that her light of Buddha was weakening. Soon, she would fall to the bottom of the Styx river like many creatures. The only difference was that while other souls could reincarnate, she would disappear forever. No one knew what Belegudeux wanted to do, and the messengers in charge of escorting the undead felt even more miserable. They didn't know why a certain highness would appear at the intersection of the underworld and the demon world. In the past, Belegudeux had always disdained the underworld. He liked cleanliness, so he would never come to the underworld, which was full of undead. What was going on this time? If they knew that he was here, these undead wouldn't dare to go over, let alone reincarnate. Even the evil spirits buried in the 18 levels of hell began to tremble and wanted to run away from home. If they did not think of a way to get a certain person to leave, Hades would definitely fall into an unprecedented panic. What is he doing here? Fight! The tall king of hell picked up the judge with one hand. There was only displeasure on his wild and handsome face. The judge stammered, It doesn't look like it. But if someone gets close to him, he'll probably go crazy. I'm not afraid of him going crazy. I've never liked this pretty boy, so I'll get rid of him today. The king of hell threw his subordinate aside and walked out with a sinister smile. The woman sitting behind him crossed her legs. Did you ask me to come to the lower realm so that I can watch you fight with the emperor? Of course not. The king of hell immediately changed his direction and sat back down obediently. The corners of his lips curled up seductively. It's just that little Seven has been missing you a lot recently and has been asking to see you. The judge, why did the big bosses of the demon world and the underworld like to use their sons as an excuse when they want to trick their wives? Also, my lord, don't smile while talking, your tail is already wagging. I can't bear to look at it. But the emperor must have met with some trouble to come here at this time. The woman fell into deep thought. You should go and help him. The king of hell thought to himself, it's fine if I don't take the opportunity to kill him, but you expect me to help him? No. Two very simple words. The woman looked at him for a while. All right, then there's nothing to talk about between us. You. The king of hell fiercely bit his fangs. I understand, I'll go now. The judge. My lord, can you have some integrity? You weren't like this before, my lord. Also, are you sure you won't lose control and accidentally fight with his highness? After all, he's your love rival for thousands of years. The king of hell couldn't take it anymore, so he left the sect and sent a ghost messenger to check on the situation. The ghost messenger said that Belegudeux came with a boat, and that the Wisdom King of Phoenix's body was on the boat. The king of hell basically understood what was going on. In a sense, the king of hell hoped that Belegudeux and Hellion Vivian could be together forever. This way, that pretty boy wouldn't have to endanger other people's families. Therefore, the king of hell generously asked the ghost messengers to lead the dead souls to other places first, so that they wouldn't continue to jump into the river Styx. The red spider lilies spread on the banks of the river Styx. Everyone said that it symbolized misfortune and despair. But even so, it couldn't stop people from yearning for it. Legend said that it grew in places where souls were the most concentrated. When the breeze blew, one could faintly hear a song. That was the singing of mermaids. Don't think that mermaids are beautiful things. That's right, they were indeed very beautiful. They had the most ethereal voices and clean faces in the world, gentle and pitiful. When they looked into your eyes, you couldn't help but agree to anything they wanted. However, when you agreed, they would bare their sharp teeth and quickly drag you to the deepest part of the river, gnawing on you until you didn't have a single piece left. Belegudeux walked over. The mermaids floated to the surface and obediently made a path for him. He placed Hellion Vivian in the Sea of Flowers. His cold eyes stared at the mermaids that he summoned. With an indifferent expression, he gave a concise order: sing until she wakes up. The mermaids didn't dare to disobey his order. Their eyes were intoxicated with his elegant and cold face. They placed their hands in front of them and gently opened their mouths. A beautiful Sanskrit song followed, blowing the Sea of Flowers. Legend said that the mermaid's song could summon souls. But in reality, this probability was very low. Belegudeux lowered his head and bit his wrist, placing it on Hellion Vivian's thin lips. He waited until drops of blood dyed her pale lips red. Then, with a splash, he jumped into the river Styx without a care. The mermaids were shocked. Some even forgot their own song. After all, their king, who was obsessed with cleanliness, never got close to the river Styx, let alone touch the water of the river Styx. But now, he was actually standing in the river Styx, enduring the filth and inhuman coldness. He lowered his head to fish for something, looking very persistent. Chapter 1002. Belegudeux turned his head sideways. The light in his eyes coldly swept past their faces one by one, carrying an extremely deep cold light. Only then did the mermaids retract their gazes and concentrate on their task. A clear and ethereal voice came little by little from the surface of the river, rising up layers of thin fog. Only at this time could the naked eye see the souls sinking to the bottom of the river. In order to find them, Belegudeux must hide the demonic nature in his body. The temperature of the river Styx was extremely low, and a mortal body could not withstand the bone-piercing cold at all. This caused the rebellious wraiths to have second thoughts. Eat him, eat him. He went down the river Styx, and won't have any magic power in a short time. They wanted to take this opportunity to clean up Belegudeux's body. After all, this man's blood was an absolute tonic for them. Such a situation would not happen a second time. It was indeed so. Hellion Vivian would never know. For her, that arrogant and aloof man revealed his weakness for the first time. The sharp claws of the wraiths pierced towards his back. With his ability, even without the demonic nature, he could completely avoid it. However, he just turned his body slightly, protecting the soul that he had just fished up in his hand, and allowed the sharp claws to pierce through his left shoulder and into his shoulder bone. The evil spirits laughed as if they had succeeded. However, before they had enough of the wonderful taste of the blood, their whole bodies seemed to be burned by a raging fire, and they wailed as they turned into fireworks in the air. It turned out that even Belegudeux's blood was full of demonic nature that no undead could bear. That powerful force was sick to a certain extent, and it was not something they could bear at all. After seeing this scene, the other evil spirits who originally wanted to get a share of the meal all paled. They should not take a step forward at all, and could only tremble and beg Belegudeux to spare them. However, this time, Belegudeux did not seem to see their existence. He did not cut them up, nor did he ask them to scram. He just bent down and continued to focus on fishing something. He didn't seem to feel any pain at all. Blood dripped down his shoulder. He carefully held the second soul, not letting his blood stain the soul strands. No one had seen Belegudeux like this. His usually beautiful fingers were red from the cold, and there were many black bruises on them. But he did not care at all. He was so serious, so persistent, so afraid of missing something, and stood in the river Styx for a full 4 hours. Only when the water from the Styx river dyed the ends of his hair and his whole body was wet did he come ashore. His eyes stared motionlessly at Hellion Vivian, who was lying in the Sea of Flowers. His whole body was cold, and something in his heart seemed to be gradually freezing. The mermaids were still singing, like the sound of a guccine pouring out in torrents. But there seemed to be an unknown flame burning in Belegudeux's chest, rampaging inside his body, and could not find a way out. She did not wake up. She did not wake up. His favorite red spider lily bloomed beside the Nirvana River in full swing. He finally got his wish and obtained a complete rebirth. However, the person who always held him in the palm of her hand and protected him would never come back. I want you to be happy and not be alone anymore. This is my wish. Why? Why didn't he stop earlier when he heard those words? Bailey Jiu moved his Adam's apple with difficulty. He clenched his fists until they were covered in blood, but he didn't move at all. It was as if his entire person had melted into the darkness, blending into the night. The night wind blew quietly, in the swaying shadow of the sea of flowers. Beligaju still stood in the same place. Drop by drop, the blood on his body fell on the white snow. Except for the day he fell, when he was immersed in the chaos for a few days. He, who had always been cold and noble, had never been in such a sorry state like this. His upbringing did not allow him to do anything beneath his dignity. But now, he lowered his eyes and buried his head in Hellion Vivian's chest. He really wanted this person to wake up, no matter what she wanted him to do. He slammed his hand on the ground, and black feathers fluttered down. With him as the center, countless resentful spirits were affected and turned into ashes in an instant. The huge resentful energy above the Nirvana River was cut open by the black smoke. The boundary of the Grand Barrier was broken, and it shattered into pieces. At this moment, the mermaids stopped singing, and all of them floated to the surface of the river. It was not because of anything else, but because they had never seen that high and mighty man cry one day. Everyone knew that no matter if it was a human, a god, or a Buddha, they would cry when they were born. Only Beligaju, who was born from the chaos, came to this world with a smile. The corners of his mouth curled up as if he was born with a rebellious expression. Such a person was actually shedding tears here. Not only the mermaids, but even the spirits of the dead within a few hundred miles stopped floating. Beligaju's eyes were filled with red marks, and the dark aura emitted from his body went straight to Buddha's Amitabha mountain. The three realms were shaken, but no one could do anything to Beligaju. The Hades shook violently, and the king of hell could not stand steadily. He simply took the opportunity to hug his beloved woman. The judge could not stand it anymore, and accidentally fell into the fourth prison. The entire Hades was in chaos, and many spirits of the dead began to choose their path in panic, and the reapers were swayed. In the human world, Bailey Shangxie clumsily hugged a little girl who was only a head shorter than him, and walked in the snow. There was no longer any of his previous hostility, and his whole body was noble and cold. He stood in the coffin shop that he was most unwilling to go to. Qing Chen was quietly nestled in his arms, and her little face had lost all color. She was lying on Bailey Shangxie's shoulder, and her lips were pale. The owner of the coffin shop had a single word, Bing. He wore a black suit, and held a black notebook in his hand. He wore flat glasses on the bridge of his nose to reduce his hostility, but his handsome and cold side profile still revealed the fact that he was not human. Wake him up, and I will pay you the money. Bailey Shangxie's voice was very low, and he looked like a little adult. Bing heard this, raised his eyebrows, and subconsciously tried to feel Helian Qingchen's ears. Those little ears were still drooping, but there was no silver earring on them, and they looked empty. Bing's thick eyebrows frowned. No? Chapter 1003. Hey, what's wrong with this kid? The other boss, Casso, bent his slender fingers and was about to poke the soft little face when Bailey Shangxie turned around and avoided the action. Casso curled his lips and muttered, I can't even touch him. Bailey Shangxie looked at him expressionlessly and said in a lukewarm voice, You are the Grim Reaper, and your aura has a bad influence on him. Is that so? Casso frowned. How come he didn't know there was such a saying? Bing was obviously more reliable. He closed the notebook in his hand and said in a lukewarm voice, He is not yet enlightened, and his physique is different from yours. However, your father's magic is too strong, and it has affected him. Put him in the coffin first. If your father can come back, everything will be easy. Bailey Shangxie did not speak, and did not refuse to deal with the Grim Reaper as before. For him now, nothing was more important than his younger brother. Bailey Shangxie bent down and put Helian Qingchen, who was smaller than him, into the softest coffin. He did not leave, but looked at the little person beside him. When Helian Qingchen felt uncomfortable, he fed her with the prepared water, and touched the little person's head with his fingers, as if he was comforting her. Casso shook his head in disbelief. I didn't expect this vicious kid to have a brother complex. He used to only know how to eat people. All demons are like this. Bing's voice was very deep, especially demons who are demonized often do a lot of things that they regret. What's more, he is a purebred demon. Killing people is just a means of survival for him. Demons are naturally cunning and selfish. You don't like them, do you? Casso smiled. I don't like them, but compared to humans, demons are not the dirtiest. So if this matter can be solved perfectly, we probably don't need to do anything, right? I don't want to fight with that man. In the end, I will only lose miserably. Even the king of hell did not win, right? But if it's ice, it might last for a long time. Don't talk to me with your cowherd. Bing pushed the glasses on the bridge of his nose. We won't fight. Everything is unpredictable. Was there a variable? Casso looked out of the window. That's right, that person should appear. The death gods were right. At the bottom of the Hades, at the end of the red spider lily, a man indeed walked over. He was no longer dressed like he did in ancient times. He wore a white shirt and coffee-colored trousers. His entire person was clean like the moon hanging high in the sky, gentle and jade-like. Behind him was a little person with a gloomy face. The little person was holding a small gourd and had dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a ghost, but because he was tugging on the man's sleeve, he looked especially cute. Bailey Georgiou's silver-white long hair was dyed with pitch-black ink, dripping in front of his body. He allowed the river water to permeate his long robe and mix with the blood on his chest, motionless. The man walked to Beligajou's side and then paused. His eyes slid across Hellion Vivian's face like water. She is still the same as when she was in Mountain Tenure. As long as you are in trouble, her first reaction is to protect you. Beligajou slowly raised his head and said in a deep voice, Jing Wushuang, it's rare to see you in such a mess. Jing Wushuang's words were directed at Beligajou, but her eyes never moved away from Hellion Vivian. That was the tenderness that she had indulged for thousands of years. In this case, her sacrifice is not in vain. Do you know why she wanted to extract the Buddha bone? Because she didn't want to obey the order of Buddhism to hunt you down. Beligajou suddenly trembled. His fingers clenched tighter as if he had lost all senses. Since I met her, she could only live in Mountain Tenure. Unlike other people, she didn't have her own palace. The vast land of Prajna was her place of cultivation. When she was very young, she liked to eat steamed buns. Every time, she would sit under me and eat the steamed buns quietly. Those people of Buddhism never played with her. Jing Wushuang retracted her gaze and looked at Beligajou's face, but she always went to that place, as if she was looking for someone. In the past, I always thought that I met her earlier. Later, I realized that the person she was looking for was you. Jing Wushuang squatted down and looked at Hellion Vivian. She was always different from others. So many people entered Buddhism on Mountain Tenure, who didn't want the protection of the Golden Lotus. But she poured the fairy water that she worked so hard to obtain on me. If only I could have met her earlier. Then, the person she likes now would be me. In Mountain Tenure, I always thought so, desperately trying to transform into a human. But I forgot that this kind of thing had nothing to do with who met her earlier, because the person who made her not feel lonely and full of different expressions was you. Beligajou paused with his wet body. His chest seemed to be torn apart by something. Large amounts of blood flowed out silently from inside. He originally thought that when she asked him to leave, it would be the most painful. However, when he saw her blocking in front of him without moving, he really felt the pain that humans talked about. It was like lines after lines were densely crawling all over his chest. With hatred, with unwillingness, and with an unprecedented heartache. Jing Wushuang's eyes were deep. He loosened his slender and white fingers, which were the feathers of the phoenix. Just fishing up the soul can't guarantee that she will wake up. She needs the Buddhist voice to gather the soul. I'm here to repay the fate that she planted in me. In the future, I will treat her well. After saying that, Jing Wushuang stood up. He didn't look at the scene behind. The little one followed behind him in confusion. He looked at him with his big eyes. Master, why don't you see her? You obviously want to see that lord for a long time. She doesn't need it. Jing Wushuang reached out his hand and rubbed the little one's head. There was desolation in his eyes. That's good. I don't want her to feel that she owes me. The little one didn't understand why the feelings were so complicated. However, the little one knew very well that if it weren't for the blood of Hellion Vivian, his master would never have come back. Now that his master had returned everything to that lord, everything should be over. How could it be over? The 10,000 steps of the path of Buddha worship were sincere kowtowing. It wasn't something that anyone could do. As a resentful baby, the little one didn't understand what kind of existence Hellion Vivian was to Jing Wushuang. Sometimes, it was because she was too important. That was why he chose to withdraw silently and retreated to the position of a good friend, so that she would no longer feel that she owed her. Chapter 1004. The night was very dark, and there was fog everywhere. Hellion Vivian felt like she was soaked in water, and there was gentle water flowing in all directions. Apart from that touch, she could not feel anything else. Her body felt like it was sinking, and even she did not know where she was going. Her mind was empty, and she did not have any consciousness. Until she felt a chill on her neck, as if something had seeped into her body. It was much colder than the river, but she could not ignore it. Who was it? Who was it that was whispering into her ear? Hellion Vivian wanted to open her eyes, but her body did not listen to her command. Vaguely, her soul seemed to have gone to the place that everyone wanted to reach. On the top of Tenya Mountain, golden lotuses were everywhere. The Venerable sat on the golden lotuses as usual, and his eyes were full of disdain and pity for her. Phoenix, how many times have I told you that you were destined to be alone from the moment you were born? This is your destiny, but you refused to listen, and insisted on pursuing something that did not belong to you. You were arrogant and rebellious, and I tolerated you because you were brought here by the true Buddha. But what about you? Do you really think that you can be with the Emperor? Phoenix, some people are born lowly, and they are suitable to be dogs. Since you have sharp claws, you should cleanse the sins of the world for Buddhism. Don't think that you can be with anyone forever, because no matter who it is, they will abandon you in the end. Beligaju is the same. Since he has fallen from heaven and become a demon, when you two meet again, you will only be a beautiful soul to him at most. Hellion Vivian smiled. Even though she was covered in wounds, she still held the phoenix scimitar in her hand, and said arrogantly, "What does my life have to do with you?" The Venerable's eyes were full of darkness. "You will definitely regret your decision today." "I won't." Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips, which were stained with blood. "Even if I die, I will drag you down with me." Pang! The phoenix blade was raised. That kind of aura that could overwhelm everyone, or it could be said that it was extremely cold and luxurious, made the Buddhist aura suddenly disappear. At the same time, it was filled with a kind of flame that could annihilate 1,000 soldiers. Hellion Vivian was a ruthless person. If she wasn't happy, she wouldn't let the other party be happy either. When she opened her eyes, there was still a thick murderous aura in them. What entered his eyes was a completely classical European architectural style. Layers of black purplish gold curtains, a large curved back velvet sofa, a long bench with silver-painted armrests, and a blazing fire in the fireplace. It appeared old-fashioned and tranquil. The silver moonlight poured down like water, enveloping the roses in front of the window, giving people a kind of dark beauty. It was enough to show that the owner of this house had good taste. Hellion Vivian wanted to get up, but before she could move, she felt the bed shake, and she was embraced by an ice-cold embrace. He hugged her very tightly, as if he wanted to crush her. His silver-white hair cascaded down the side of his face, falling straight into her neck. There was even a heart-wrenching dampness on his hair. Hellion Vivian finally reacted and reached out to grab him. "You. Shut up." The man was very close to her, and the cold breath he exhaled hit her skin little by little, which didn't match his hoarse voice at all. Hellion Vivian was obedient at this time. Although she didn't know why a certain highness was angry, she still had to be obedient at this time. After a while, she spoke. Only then did she open her mouth and say, "Is your demonic nature gone?" "It seems to be gone." Beligaju didn't answer her. Something seemed to be ignited in those long and narrow eyes of his. Under the straight bridge of his nose, his thin lips opened slightly. "Idiot." "I'm not an idiot." Hellion Vivian felt that she had to prove herself. You don't know, when my soul was pulled out just now, I saw that old man, the Venerable One. He actually dared to laugh at me, and I killed him with a single slash. In fact, the Venerable One had died long ago. When one's soul was pulled out, they would remember things that happened a long time ago. Hellion Vivian had experienced the scene that she saw long ago, but her consciousness was a bit hazy, and she mistakenly thought that it was real. But Belegaju didn't know about this matter. Now that he heard it, he understood what Jing Wushuang said. He wondered if at that time, everyone was forcing her to go down the path of the devil to take him back. This idiot was injured in a place where he couldn't see. Belegaju tightened his fingers and pressed her back into his embrace. This kind of thing won't happen again in the future. Hellion Vivian was a bit confused. Did he mean that he wouldn't use the devil transformation in the future? That's good. Hellion Vivian was very happy, and as soon as she was happy, her stomach began to growl. Her body was still a bit weak, but the weaker she was, the emptier her stomach felt. Belegaju naturally also felt the growl. He raised his head and looked at her, his handsome face looking good. Hellion Vivian seriously looked at Belegaju and defended herself. Fighting is a very energy-consuming thing, it's normal to be hungry. Belegaju didn't care what excuse she found, and directly carried her in his arms, walking over to the long wooden table. The table was covered with a black tablecloth, and there were a few bouquets of red roses as decorations. Unlike humans, the demons did not have desserts on their tables. Instead, they had buckets of fresh blood and fine wine. He put her down, and his fingers picked up a bottle of wine. He casually opened it with his fangs, and leaned his enviable back against the wooden chair. He held her with one hand, and his thin lips slightly raised, adding a touch of gentleness to his doll-like face. What do you want to eat? Not now, let's go back to the human world first. Hellion Vivian was worried about the two little ones. She wasn't sure if such a big demon would affect Shang Xie and Qing Chen. Even if she was hungry, it was difficult for her to eat in peace. She pulled Belegaju and was about to leave. However, just as she got up, Belegaju held her hand, and then carried her up. His side profile was unbelievably gentle. Hellion Vivian felt that this time when she woke up, His Highness seemed to be doting on her unbelievably. In the past, His Highness would walk in front, and she would follow behind, carrying a lot of things. Being carried like this didn't suit her image of an arms tycoon. But forget it, as long as he was happy. After all, as a domineering CEO, she had to know how to be considerate. It's really going to end soon, but I need to write something with love. Don't worry, I won't drag it out. I'll hug and nibble on all of you. Coming to this city of books, the happiest thing was to get to know all of you. I hope that it will end happily, and that we can still be together in the future if fate wills it. Chapter 1005. My lord, are we not going over? The judge hiding in the dark alley respectfully asked the person beside him. The king of hell leaned against the wall and crossed his arms in front of his chest. I'm not going there, he said with a wild aura. Then why are we standing here? The judge was very puzzled. With their status, it was really indecent for them to do such sneaky actions. Furthermore, they were from the Hades. If they were discovered peeping like this in the demon world, it would be very embarrassing. The king of hell stood in all directions and said with a domineering expression, "What do you know? This is called observing the enemy." The judge was speechless. My lord, wake up, please. That His Highness has never been your love rival. Can you change this idea of being a love rival all over the world? Also, if it wasn't for you not taking the madam seriously, how would you end up like this? Of course, the judge only thought about it and did not dare to say it out loud. The king of hell looked at Belegaju's back and narrowed his eyes. This guy can actually be a demon so calmly. To be honest, they came from the same place, the beginning of chaos. The reason why he could maintain his rationality was because he was in charge of the underworld from the very beginning. Unlike Belegaju, who insisted on being the emperor in the heavenly axiom, he had long suspected that that person had taken a liking to something in the upper realm when he was young. Otherwise, with that guy's original appearance, How could he have stayed in the heavenly axiom? After all, they were all the same, emitting viciousness from their bones. They were more selfish than anyone else. Apart from killing, there was nothing that they found interesting. The king of hell always wondered what would become of that person when he tore off that layer of noble holiness and was only left with his original demonic nature. He estimated that the other party would cause more damage than him. After all, he was from the wild faction and would do whatever he wanted. That person's heart was indeed black. But now, he was actually able to control his destructive nature very well. Was he afraid of hurting someone? Heh. Thinking of this, King of Hell suddenly smiled. Let's go. You're leaving just like that. Didn't you need to observe the enemy? The judge scratched his head. King of Hell's thin lips curved. A married old man is no longer competitive for me. The judge was speechless. A married old man? My lord, are you sure you're not jealous of Her Highness' beauty? Belegaju controlled his demonic nature, and the underworld was no longer in chaos. The undead who came and went finally rejoined the reincarnation queue. One by one, they stood there in a straight line, only wanting to be reincarnated into a good body. It had to be said that after Belegaju's torment, the order in Hades was much better than before. Previously, those undead were either making a fuss about not wanting to go to hell or not wanting to drink Granny Meng's soup. Eventually, a ghost messenger had to come out and suppress them. Now, they were extremely obedient because they found that even if they suffered the pain of being fried, it was still better than being annihilated by the devil chi that soared into the sky. The capital was also known as Sijio City. It described the layout of the city. There were many gates, such as Tiananmen, Dianmen, Dong'anmen, Xi'anmen, and countless others. It was not easy for ordinary people to find 2 children in this bustling city. The traffic in the capital was notoriously terrible in Huaxia. Everywhere one went, there would be traffic jams. Taking the subway was even more crowded, especially now that it was rush hour. Whether it was line 10 or line 4, they were full of cars. No one would know that above their heads, in the dark sky, there was a man wearing a black t-shirt, with huge black wings behind him. He wore a pair of gloves that clung tightly to his skin, like a demon described in comics, and landed in a dilapidated alley. This alley was located in the old city of the capital, next to Shishahai, and further ahead was the built inclined Tobacco Pouch Street. At this time, the inclined Tobacco Pouch Street was always full of dazzling lineups. One could see clear bars everywhere, red lights and green willows. Most of the people who came here were tourists. Everyone was holding their phones to take pictures, and happy faces could be seen everywhere. In fact, the real alley in old Beijing was not here, but turned right and kept going inside. If someone came here at this time, they would definitely see the demon coming out of the night and the Grim Reaper welcoming him. Hey, you finally found me. Casso was no longer wearing human clothes, but a cloak like a cloak. He looked at Belegaju lazily. They are all in the house, but Bing has always disliked the existence of demon feathers in our place, so Your Highness, please put away your wings. How about it? Belegaju looked at him indifferently. Casso did not understand what the other party meant. Hellion Vivian came over and happily explained for him. He wants to say whether you are stupid or not. If you want to enter the door, of course you have to put away your wings, otherwise you will definitely be met. In that case, you don't need to remind him. Casso. Thank you for explaining it to me. He gritted his teeth as he said this. Unlike Bing, who was still flipping through the black notebook, when he saw Bailey Jiaoju and Hellion Wei Wei in front of him, he just raised his eyebrows. Then, he lowered his head and calculated on the abacus. His voice was calm as he said, the cost of accommodation, food, and coffin is 300 billion in total. 300 billion? Hellion Vivian was stunned. Do coffins make so much money now? Casso snorted and was very proud. We accept hell money. 1 yuan could buy millions of hell money. What was there to be proud of? Hellion Vivian felt better. Besides, looking at the 2 people, her son should be fine. Bailey Shangxie was indeed fine, but Hellion Qingchen was a little tired, but he was much better than when he came. When Hellion Vivian and the others came in, He was sitting in the coffin like a kitten with his ears down, holding the milk that Bailey Shangxia had just poured for him. When he saw Hellion Vivian, his eyes immediately lit up, and he wanted to pounce on Hellion Vivian. Belagaju blocked him, put one hand in his pocket, and picked up the little girl with the other. His elegant and domineering look was mixed with his appearance, like a big boss fighting for territory. He raised Qing Chen high and looked at her in the eye. His thick eyebrows frowned. Is the devil's aura stronger than the Reiki? Qing Chen's blood was 90% Reiki, and the remaining 10% was devil's aura. But now, the devil's aura was stronger than the Reiki. In addition to the increase of the devil's aura, the most important reason was that the Reiki in his body had decreased. Generally speaking, no one could affect the Reiki in his body because he was the descendant of the phoenix, unless. Chapter 1006. The phoenix's spiritual energy was also weakened to the extreme. Belagaju's deep eyes suddenly narrowed. He turned his head and looked in the direction of Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian was a little confused by his gaze. She blinked her eyes and asked, "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Belagaju thought for a moment. He picked up the little one and placed him on top of his head. He felt the power in his body again. Hellion Qingchen grabbed the hair under his palms with two little claws. He looked at Bailey Shangxia with his big round eyes, as if he was asking his father what was wrong with him. Bailey Shangxia was worried that his little brother would be thrown by his father, so he reached out to catch him. He was not tall, so his noble and serious little face coupled with his action looked a little funny. After Belagaju felt the power, he threw Qingchen to his eldest son. Then, he pulled Hellion Vivian over. He looked around and asked in a deep voice, "Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere? Does being hungry count?" Hellion Vivian asked seriously. Belagaju was stunned. He reached out his finger and knocked on her head. "What do you want to eat?" "Too many things. Crabs, lobsters, steaks, and so on." Hellion Vivian saw that her two sons were fine. She instantly regained her fighting spirit. Basically, they were talking about meat. Belagaju pulled them over and said to the two little ones without looking back, "Follow me." Then, he walked out of the coffin shop. The Grim Reapers would not stop him, especially Bing, who did not want him to stay here. He had never liked demons, but this did not stop them from earning money from demons. Moreover, the devil's aura overpowered the spiritual energy in the little one's body. This was not normal. Leaving an abnormal factor in the coffin shop would only attract the attention of the patrollers in the human world. Unlike Casso, Bing's thinking had reached a certain level of precision. On the other hand, Casso was a little reluctant to leave. He looked at Qingchen and said, "Little brat, when are you coming back? I can introduce you to other children. Have you seen our little king of hell? He is now wandering around the human world all day, and his goal is to woo Little Hook every day. You will definitely like these two little brothers when you see them. Listen to your brother and come here often, okay? Most importantly, remember to bring an apple the next time you come. The redder the color, the better." The Grim Reaper liked to eat apples. Qingchen knew this from reading manga. She didn't expect the Grim Reaper to be like this in real life. "If I bring apple, will you bring me to the underworld to play?" Qingchen had always been smart, and she quickly began to negotiate with Casso. Casso didn't refuse, but he found it strange. "Why do you want to go to the underworld? The underworld is not fun at all. There is no cotton candy or ice cream. Even His Highness Little King of Hell goes to the human world every day. Why do you want to go to the underworld?" "Because the underworld is a little further away from the demon world. It is too hard for my brother to go to the demon world by himself. I can go with him, carry his small school bag, and bring him chocolate cake." Qingchen said seriously. Bailey Shangxia, who was standing at the side, was warmed by his younger brother's cuteness. He conveniently picked up the little one who was a head shorter than him. There is no need to negotiate with him. "Next time I go to the demon world, I will bring you with me." In this way, he would not always be in danger from his father. He could also protect his little brother at all times. The last time he went to the demon world to cultivate, His little brother was bullied in the human world. This bullied referred to the incident with little fatty Cheng. It was enough to prove how serious Bailey Shangxie's brother was. Beligaju wasn't worried that the two little ones couldn't keep up with his pace. After walking out of the alley, they arrived at the bustling street of Huhai. The street was filled with the atmosphere of the human world. Everyone was very happy. The resident singers in the bar were handsome and beautiful. They were very pleasing to the eye. However, even in such a crowded street, Helian Wei Wei's family of 4 still received a high number of heads turning. Especially a man like Beligaju. It seemed that no matter where you threw him, he would be the first to be noticed. Bailey Shangxie was evaluating which human's soul was more delicious. His father glanced at him, indicating that he should find a place to eat. Shouldn't this kind of thing be done by the adults? Bailey Shangxie complained in his heart while his eyes fell on a shabu-shabu shop. There were a lot of people in line. The business should be good. Mom and little brother both liked to eat hot pot. Although Bailey Shangxie was a demon and very sinister and cunning, he still abided by some cultured rules, such as waiting in line for a seat. This shabu-shabu shop was indeed very popular. There were more than a dozen tables in front of Helian Vivian and her family. Helian Vivian wasn't in a hurry. In order to eat the delicious shabu-shabu, she first bought a fried chicken chop to fill her stomach. First, she bent down and fed the two little ones, then she fed Beligaju a bite. Finally, she ate it herself. It felt very comfortable to walk on the street. Every shop had its own specialties. Eating fried chicken and drinking iced tea like this, even His Highness seemed to be gentler. It wasn't Helian Vivian's illusion. Since she woke up, His Highness had been very gentle. If there was such a man who deliberately put his arms around you to prevent others from touching you when walking in a crowd, then he would be like this. When he lowered his head, he would smell the sandalwood fragrance of the other party, which proved that he really liked you. Bailey Jiaoju was obviously a person who loved cleanliness and would never allow anyone to touch him. But now, he would rather be stained by himself so that he could turn sideways to protect himself. Helian Vivian was slow, but she wasn't a blockhead. Looking at the side of his face covered by silver hair, she kissed him without thinking. Beligaju suddenly froze. He looked back at her, his eyes deep and dark. Helian Vivian suddenly felt that His Highness must be touched. The novel was right. As a military tycoon, as long as he could give his other half a hot kiss at a critical moment, he could conquer the other half from body to heart. This was the activity that Helian Vivian was most satisfied with deep down in her heart. But the reality was, "Give me a tissue." Helian Vivian, "What for?" "Wipe your face. There's oil on your mouth." Beligaju's voice was very light. When it was light to a certain extent, it was extremely lethal. Helian Vivian was immediately petrified. She didn't understand why His Highness always liked to ruin the atmosphere. It was fine if he didn't open his mouth, but once he did, it would ruin his drool-inducing face. Well, sons are still the most likable. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.